Bear Malls, Marathon Runners, October 6, 2024. The morning of October 6, 2024 dawned crisp and clear over the Gallatin National Forest in southwestern Montana, the kind of autumn day that draws thousands of outdoor enthusiasts to the rugged wilderness surrounding Big Sky Resort. At 6,247 feet above sea level, the resort nestled in the shadow of Lone Peak, whose granite spires thrust skyward to 11,166 feet, creating a dramatic backdrop for what would become one of the most horrifying wildlife encounters in American marathon history. The Big Sky Mountain Marathon had been conceived 3 years earlier by race director Marcus Chen, a 42-year-old former Olympic trials qualifier who had moved to Montana in 2019 after burning out on the corporate consulting world in Seattle. Chen had envisioned an event that would showcase the raw beauty of the Northern Rockies while challenging runners with a course that wound through pristine wilderness areas where elk bugled in the early morning mist and golden eagles soared on thermals rising from the valley floor. The 26.2-mile route began at the base of the resort's ski lifts, climbed through dense stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, crested a series of ridgelines offering panoramic views of the Spanish Peaks, and descended through open meadows back to the resort village. What Chen hadn't fully anticipated was how the race's October timing would coincide with the peak of grizzly bear hyperphagia, the period when bears enter a feeding frenzy to build fat reserves for winter hibernation. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks had noted increased bear activity throughout the Gallatin Range that fall, with several garbage raiding incidents in West Yellowstone and a tent slashing at a backcountry campsite near Specimen Creek. The bears were desperate, consuming up to 20,000 calories per day, their behavior increasingly unpredictable as they searched for high-energy food sources before the first heavy snows forced them into their dens. Samantha Brooks arrived in Big Sky on the afternoon of October 4th, 2 days before the race, driving her silver Toyota 4Runner up the winding mountain highway from Bozeman. At 34, Brooks was a veteran ultramarathoner from Portland, Oregon, who worked as a physical therapist, specializing in sports medicine. She had completed 12 marathons and 6 50-kilometer trail races. Her lean, 5'6" frame and methodical training approach perfectly suited to the grinding demands of mountain running. Brooks had discovered trail running 5 years earlier during a difficult divorce, finding solace in the rhythm of her footsteps on forest paths and the burning clarity that came with pushing her body to its limits. Her marriage to David, a software engineer, had ended after 8 years when they realized they wanted fundamentally different lives. He craved stability, predictability, the comfort of routine. She yearned for adventure, for challenges that stripped away the comfortable facades of modern life and revealed what lay beneath. Trail running had become her meditation, her therapy, her path to understanding herself. Each race was a journey inward as much as a physical test, and the Big Sky Marathon represented a new frontier, her first high-altitude mountain race in grizzly country. Brooks had spent months preparing for the elevation and terrain, running the hills of Forest Park in Portland with a weighted pack, studying topographic maps of the racecourse, and consulting with her friend Maria Santos, a wildlife biologist who had worked in Glacier National Park. Santos had emphasized the importance of making noise on the trail, carrying bear spray, and understanding that fall was the most dangerous time to encounter grizzlies. "They're not the same animals they are in summer," Santos had warned during a training run along the Columbia River Gorge. "When they're in hyperphagia, their entire world revolves around food. They'll take risks they normally wouldn't, defend resources more aggressively, and react unpredictably to human presence." Brooks had taken the advice seriously, purchasing a canister of bear spray and clipping it to her running belt. though she harbored secret doubts about whether she could actually use it effectively in a crisis. She had never seen a wild bear, despite years of trail running in the Cascades, and part of her hoped the Big Sky Race would offer that experience. From a safe distance, of course. Alan Meyer's path to the Big Sky Marathon had been more circuitous. A 28-year-old emergency room physician from Minneapolis, Meyer had taken up marathon running 3 years earlier as a way to cope with the stress of working night shifts at Hennepin County Medical Center. His Irish Catholic family had produced a long line of doctors and nurses, and Meyer felt the weight of that tradition even as he struggled with the emotional toll of emergency medicine. He had seen too many trauma cases, too many overdoses, too many families destroyed by violence and addiction. Running gave him a way to process those experiences, to burn off the adrenaline and anger that built up during his shifts. Meyer was tall and rangy at 6'2", with the pale complexion and blue eyes of his Irish heritage. Though months of training runs had given him a runner's tan and the lean efficiency that came with logging 70-mile weeks. He had qualified for Boston the previous year with a 2:47 marathon in Chicago, but had deferred his entry to focus on trail running, drawn to the solitude and natural beauty that road races couldn't provide. The Big Sky Marathon appealed to him precisely because of its remoteness and difficulty, a chance to test himself against the mountains rather than against the clock. Meyer had flown into Bozeman on October 3rd and spent a day acclimating to the altitude, running easy miles on the resort's Nordic ski trails and marveling at the vast sky that gave the area its name. He had grown up in the flatlands of Minnesota, where the horizon was a distant line broken only by grain elevators and cell towers. Here the mountains rose in every direction, their peaks dusted with fresh snow from an early October storm. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of winter. Like Brooks, Meyer had done his research on bear safety, consulting online forums and speaking with a friend who worked as a paramedic in Anchorage. He carried bear spray and a small bell on his running belt, though he found the constant jingling annoying and had taken to muffling it with electrical tape during training runs. Meyer's medical background made him acutely aware of the damage a grizzly could inflict. The massive, crushing power of their jaws, the razor-sharp claws that could eviscerate a human with a single swipe. But that knowledge was clinical, theoretical. He had treated gunshot wounds and car accident victims, but had never seen the kind of trauma that only nature's apex predators could deliver. The race director, Marcus Chen, had spent the week before the marathon dealing with a cascade of logistical challenges. An early snowstorm on September 28th had dumped 6 inches of snow on the upper portions of the course, forcing Chen to modify the route to avoid potentially icy conditions above 8,000 feet. The change eliminated the most spectacular viewpoints, but reduced the risk of hypothermia and falls, a necessary compromise for a race that was still building its reputation. Chen had been a competitive runner since high school, competing for the University of Washington before a stress fracture in his left tibia ended his collegiate career. He had spent 15 years in the corporate world, climbing the ladder at a consulting firm in Seattle, but had never lost his love for the mountains. A successful exit from a startup in 2018 had given him the financial freedom to pursue his passion project, creating world-class trail races that would draw serious athletes to Montana's spectacular wilderness. The Big Sky Marathon was Chen's most ambitious undertaking yet, requiring coordination with the Forest Service, local emergency services, and resort management. He had walked every mile of the course multiple times, installing aid stations and marking turns with biodegradable ribbon that would be removed after the race. Safety was his primary concern, and he had hired 4 local guides to serve as course marshals at key points where runners might go astray. Chen's biggest worry wasn't bears or weather, but altitude sickness. Many of the registered runners were coming from sea level, and the race's start at 6,247 feet could cause problems for those who hadn't arrived early enough to acclimatize. He had printed warnings about the symptoms of altitude sickness and posted them prominently at the race expo, but he knew that competitive runners often ignored such advice, trusting in their fitness to overcome any challenge. Dr. Patricia Wong, the race's medical director, shared Chen's concerns about altitude, but had a different set of worries entirely. A 45-year-old emergency physician who worked at Bozeman Health, Wong had volunteered for the medical team after participating in the race's inaugural year. She understood the unique challenges of providing emergency care in remote wilderness areas where evacuation times could stretch to hours and weather could change from benign to life-threatening in minutes. Wong had assembled a medical team of 6 volunteers, 2 other physicians, 2 paramedics, and 2 EMTs, positioned at strategic points along the course. The most remote aid station, at mile 15.5, where the course crested Beaver Creek Pass, was a 45-minute ATV ride from the nearest road. Wong had insisted on positioning a paramedic there, despite Chen's initial reluctance to bear the additional cost. "It's not if we'll have a serious medical emergency," she had told him during a planning meeting in August. "It's when." Wong had trained for wilderness medicine scenarios throughout her career, but had never dealt with a major trauma in backcountry conditions. Her experience was limited to altitude sickness, dehydration, and the occasional broken bone from hiking accidents. She carried an extensive medical kit and had a satellite communication device for calling in helicopter evacuations, but she privately hoped she would never need to use either. Among the 312 registered runners, several others would play crucial roles in the coming tragedy. Jennifer Walsh, a 39-year-old search and rescue volunteer from Missoula, was running her 3rd Big Sky Marathon. Walsh worked as a park ranger at Glacier National Park during the summer months and had extensive experience with bear encounters, having been charged by grizzlies twice during her career. She carried bear spray and knew how to use it, but also understood that a charging grizzly could cover 50 yards in 3 seconds, faster than most humans could react. Walsh had grown up in northwestern Montana and had been hiking and camping in bear country since childhood. Her father, a retired game warden, had taught her to read bear sign and understand their behavior patterns. She knew that October was the most dangerous time to be in grizzly habitat, when desperate bears would take extraordinary risks to access high-calorie food sources. Walsh had seen the aftermath of bear attacks during her ranger career, the massive puncture wounds from canine teeth, the parallel claw marks that looked like they had been made by a giant rake. She had helped evacuate 2 mauling victims over the years and had never forgotten the primal terror in their eyes. Running beside Walsh for much of the race would be Tom Bradley, a 51-year-old wildlife photographer from Jackson, Wyoming. Bradley had been documenting grizzly bears for over 20 years, following them through Yellowstone and the Canadian Rockies with telephoto lenses and infinite patience. He understood bear behavior better than almost anyone, having observed hundreds of individuals through all seasons and life stages. Bradley knew that a grizzly in hyperphagia was a fundamentally different animal than the bears most people imagined. Not the curious, generally cautious creatures of summer, but desperate, focused predators willing to take enormous risks. Bradley had seen bears strip the berries from entire mountainsides in a single day, watched them dig tirelessly for ground squirrels, observed them fishing for hours in icy streams. He had also seen them defend carcasses with murderous intensity and charge perceived threats with explosive speed. Bradley carried the most comprehensive bear spray available and knew exactly how to deploy it, but he also knew that spray had limitations. Wind, distance, and adrenaline could all affect its effectiveness. Sometimes, he had learned, even perfect technique wasn't enough. The race's head of security was retired Montana Highway Patrol Sergeant Mike Hansen, a barrel-chested 54-year-old who had grown up hunting and fishing in the Gallatin Valley. Hansen had responded to bear attacks before during his law enforcement career and knew the brutal reality of what grizzlies could do to human beings. He had helped recover the remains of a backcountry camper near Yellowstone in 2019, an experience that had given him nightmares for months afterward. Hansen's role in the marathon was primarily crowd control and traffic management, but Chen had also asked him to coordinate with local law enforcement and wildlife authorities in case of emergencies. Hansen carried a satellite phone and had direct contact with the Gallatin County Sheriff's Department, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and the Forest Service. He had tried to convince Chen to post armed guards at the remote aid stations, but the race director had balked at the cost and complexity. "You can't protect against every possibility," Chen had argued during a planning meeting. "We've got bear spray, noisemakers, and experienced volunteers. That's more than most trail races provide." Hansen had reluctantly agreed, but he had positioned himself at the Beaver Creek Pass aid station, the most remote and dangerous part of the course. If something went wrong, he wanted to be where he could respond quickly. The weather forecast for October 6th called for partly cloudy skies with temperatures ranging from 28 degrees at sunrise to 52 degrees by mid-afternoon. Light winds from the west would keep conditions comfortable for running, though the overnight low of 19 degrees had created patches of ice on north-facing slopes above 7,500 feet. Chen had briefed his course marshals about the ice conditions and instructed them to warn runners about potentially slippery sections. What the weather forecast didn't capture was the invisible but crucial factor of scent conditions. The light westerly wind would carry human odors eastward along the race route, potentially alerting bears to the approaching runners from considerable distances. But in the complex topography of the Gallatin Range, wind patterns could be unpredictable, swirling through draws and canyons in ways that might mask human presence until runners were dangerously close to unseen wildlife. Brooks had checked into the Summit Hotel at Big Sky Resort on Thursday afternoon, October 4th, and spent her first evening walking the resort village to calm her pre-race nerves. The village bustled with early fall tourists and ski resort employees preparing for the coming winter season. Brooks had eaten dinner alone at the Olive Bees restaurant, studying race maps and trying to visualize the course profile. The marathon would climb nearly 3,000 feet of elevation over the first 12 miles before beginning a long descent back to the village. Her strategy was to run conservatively on the climbs and let her strength show on the descents, where her experience with technical terrain would be an advantage. After dinner, Brooks had attended the mandatory pre-race briefing in the resort's conference center. Chen had covered the standard topics: course markings, aid station locations, cutoff times, but had spent considerable time on safety protocols. The race would start at 7 a.m. to ensure that all runners finished before dark, but participants were required to carry headlamps in case of delays. Everyone had to sign additional liability waivers, acknowledging the risks of running in wilderness areas, including the possibility of wildlife encounters. "We've never had a serious bear incident in 3 years of this race," Chen had told the assembled runners. "But we're in their habitat, and October is an active time for grizzlies preparing for hibernation. Make noise, especially when running alone or in areas with limited visibility. If you see a bear, do not approach it. Back away slowly and report the sighting to the nearest aid station." Walsh had raised her hand during the question period. "What's the protocol if someone encounters an aggressive bear?" Chen had deferred to Dr. Wong, who stepped to the microphone. "Don't run unless you're already very close to a building or vehicle," she had said. "Running triggers a bear's chase instinct. Make yourself appear large, speak in a calm voice, and back away slowly. If you have bear spray, prepare to use it when the bear gets within 30 feet, but don't spray unless you're certain of your target and wind direction." What if the bear makes contact? Walsh had pressed. Wong's expression had grown serious. If it's a defensive attack, a surprised mother with cubs, for example, play dead. Lie on your stomach, cover your neck with your hands, and remain still until you're certain the bear has left. If it's a predatory attack, fight back with everything you have. Use rocks, sticks, anything you can find. Go for the bear's face and nose. The room had fallen silent as the runners absorbed this information. Most of them had signed up for a challenging mountain race, not a survival course. But this was the reality of running in grizzly country. The knowledge that they were entering an ecosystem where humans were not the apex predator. Maya had been staying at a budget motel in Bozeman and had driven up to Big Sky on the morning of October 5th for the pre-race briefing. As an emergency physician, he found Wong's safety briefing particularly unsettling because he understood exactly what massive trauma meant in medical terms. He had treated victims of dog attacks and knew that bear jaws could exert pressure of over 1,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a human skull like an eggshell. After the briefing, Maya had struck up a conversation with Brooks at the Race Expo, where local vendors were selling everything from energy gels to Montana huckleberry jam. They discovered they were both staying near the resort and agreed to share a pre-race dinner at the Aussel and Spur Pizza Company. Their conversation had ranged from running strategies to their respective careers, and they found themselves genuinely enjoying each other's company. "I'm hoping to break 3 hours," Brooks had said over a margarita pizza. "The altitude might slow me down, but I've been training specifically for the climbing." Maya had laughed. "I'm just hoping to finish upright. This is my first mountain marathon, and I have no idea how my sea-level fitness will translate." They had agreed to start together in the morning, planning to run as a group through the early miles when the course was most congested. Neither of them mentioned their concerns about bears, though both were thinking about the wildlife warnings they had heard throughout the day. That night, Brooks had trouble sleeping, despite her exhaustion from traveling. Her room at the Summit Hotel overlooked the base of Lone Peak, and she found herself staring out at the moonlit mountain, trying to imagine what lay ahead. She had run dozens of marathons, but none in terrain this remote or challenging. The altitude was already affecting her. She felt slightly lightheaded and had awakened twice with a mild headache. She hoped it wouldn't get worse during the race. Maya had spent the evening at his motel in Bozeman, reviewing his gear and charging his GPS watch. He had packed light for the race, water bottles, energy gels, and his phone for emergencies. The bear spray hung from his running belt like a foreign appendage, reminding him with every step that this wasn't a typical marathon. He had practiced drawing and aiming the canister, but hoped fervently that he would never need to use it. The morning of October 6th began before dawn for most of the marathon participants. Brooks was awake by 5:30 a.m., drinking coffee and eating a light breakfast of oatmeal and banana. The pre-race nerves were familiar, a combination of excitement and anxiety that she had learned to channel into performance. She dressed in layers, knowing that the 28-degree start temperature would give way to much warmer conditions as the sun climbed higher. Maya had driven up from Bozeman in darkness, arriving at the resort by 6:15 a.m. The parking lots were already filling with runners making final preparations, their headlamps creating moving points of light in the pre-dawn gloom. The temperature was bitter cold, and Maya could see his breath as he gathered his gear from the car. He found Brooks near the start line, both of them jogging in place to stay warm. "Ready for this?" she asked, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "As ready as I'll ever be," Maya replied, adjusting his bear spray for the 12th time. "How are you feeling with the altitude?" "Better than last night. I think I'm adjusting." Brooks had actually slept poorly and still felt slightly off, but she didn't want to voice her concerns. She had trained too hard and come too far to let altitude sickness derail her race. Chen had been awake since 4 a.m., coordinating with his volunteer staff and checking conditions on the upper portions of the course. His course marshals had reported icy patches above 7,500 feet, but nothing that would require further route modifications. The aid stations were staffed and ready, and the medical team was in position. Everything appeared to be going according to plan. Dr. Wong had positioned herself at the main medical tent near the start-finish area, but she was in radio contact with the medical volunteers stationed throughout the course. The Beaver Creek Pass aid station at mile 15.5 remained her biggest concern. If someone was seriously injured there, evacuation would be complicated and time-consuming. Walsh had arrived early and was warming up with a group of local runners who knew the course well. As a search and rescue volunteer, she understood the importance of starting conservatively and saving energy for the challenging middle miles. She had run this race twice before and knew where the course demanded respect. Bradley, the wildlife photographer, was making final adjustments to the small camera he carried for documenting the race experience. He had photographed dozens of trail races over the years and was always struck by the contrast between human endurance and natural beauty. Today, he hoped to capture some of the stunning fall colors that painted the aspen groves in brilliant gold. At exactly 7 a.m., Chen fired the starting pistol and 312 runners began their journey into the Gallatin National Forest. The first mile wound through the resort village before crossing Beaver Creek on a wooden footbridge and entering the National Forest land. The pace was relaxed in the early going, with runners bunched together and chattering nervously about the challenge ahead. Brooks and Meyer had positioned themselves in the middle of the pack, running comfortably at an 8-minute per mile pace that felt easy in the cool morning air. They were surrounded by dozens of other runners, creating a steady drumbeat of footsteps on the packed dirt trail. The noise level was high enough to alert any wildlife to their presence, exactly as the safety briefings had recommended. The first aid station, at mile 3.2, was positioned where the course began its serious climbing toward Beaver Creek Pass. Volunteers offered water, sports drinks, and encouragement to the passing runners. Most participants paused only briefly, knowing that the real test lay ahead in the high country. Walsh passed through the aid station running smoothly, her pace unchanged from the start. She had been making conversation with Bradley, the photographer, and they had settled into a comfortable rhythm together. Both were experienced mountain runners who understood the importance of pacing themselves for the long grind ahead. As the runners climbed higher, the forest canopy closed overhead, creating a tunnel of lodgepole pines that blocked much of the early morning sunlight. The trail was well marked but narrow, forcing the field to string out into single file in many sections. The noise level dropped as conversations became more difficult and runners focused on their breathing and footwork. It was in this quieter environment that the first ominous signs appeared. At mile 6.8, where the trail crossed a small creek, several runners noticed fresh bear scat on the trail, large, dark piles filled with berry seeds and still steaming in the cold air. The scat was enormous, clearly from a large grizzly, and so fresh that the bear might have passed through just minutes earlier. Walsh was among the first to notice the sign. As a park ranger, she could read bear scat like a book, and everything about these droppings concerned her. The size indicated a very large animal, probably a mature male. The consistency and content suggested a bear in active feeding mode, consuming massive quantities of huckleberries and other high-energy foods. Most troubling, the scat was still warm, the bear was close. "We need to make more noise," Walsh told Bradley as they passed the site. "That bear is right here somewhere." Bradley had noticed the scat as well and was scanning the forest for movement. His photographer's eye was trained to spot wildlife, and he could sense when animals were nearby, even if he couldn't see them. The forest felt different here, quieter, more tense, as if the normal rhythms of life had been disrupted. Behind them, Brooks and Meyer approached the creek crossing, still running together. They had been making steady progress up the mountain, their pace slowing as the grade increased, but their effort remaining controlled. Neither had experience reading wildlife sign, and they passed the bear scat without recognizing its significance. The trail continued climbing through dense forest, switchbacking up the mountainside toward Beaver Creek Pass. At 8,200 feet elevation, the pass marked the highest point on the course and the most remote section of the route. From there, runners would begin a long descent back toward the resort, covering the final 10.7 miles mostly downhill. The Beaver Creek Pass aid station had been set up in a small meadow just below the actual pass, positioned to take advantage of the only flat ground for miles. Hansen, the retired highway patrol sergeant, had arrived at 5:30 a.m. by ATV, carrying supplies and communications equipment up the rough access road. He was joined by 2 volunteers, Sarah Mitchell, a nurse from Bozeman, and Jake Rivera, a local trail runner who knew the area well. The aid station's position offered spectacular views of the Spanish Peaks to the south, but it also represented the most isolated point on the entire course. The nearest road was 3 miles away down a steep, rocky track that would challenge even an ATV. Cell phone coverage was non-existent, forcing Hansen to rely on his satellite phone for emergency communications. By 9:45 a.m., the first runners began arriving at Beaver Creek Pass. The leaders were maintaining a pace that would finish well under 3 hours, impressive given the challenging terrain and altitude. They grabbed water and energy gels and continued toward the descent, eager to begin the fast section of the course where they could make up time. Walsh and Bradley reached the aid station at 10:03 a.m., running in 4th and 5th place overall. Both had noticed increasing amounts of bear sign along the trail, more scat, claw marks on trees, and the musky scent that experienced outdoors people associated with grizzlies. Walsh mentioned her concerns to Hansen, who had been watching for wildlife all morning. "I haven't seen anything," Hansen told her, "but you're right about the sign. There's definitely a big bear working this area." Walsh considered dropping out of the race, but decided to continue with increased caution. She and Bradley agreed to stay together and make noise whenever the trail offered limited visibility. Both had bear spray readily accessible and had discussed how they would react to an encounter. At 10:17 a.m., Brooks and Meyer crested the final switchback before Beaver Creek Pass, running strongly despite the altitude and challenging terrain. They had maintained their partnership throughout the climb, encouraging each other through the difficult sections and sharing the work of pacing. Both were feeling good and looking forward to the descent, where they hoped to pick up their pace. The meadow around the aid station offered welcome relief from the enclosed feeling of the forest trail. Brooks and Meyer jogged up to the tables where volunteers were dispensing water and food, grateful for the chance to refuel before the long descent. Mitchell, the nurse, noticed that both runners appeared to be handling the altitude well and were maintaining good hydration. "How are you feeling?" she asked Brooks, who was drinking deeply from a water bottle. "Great," Brooks replied. "That climb was tough, but I feel strong, ready for the downhill." Meyer was studying his GPS watch, calculating split times and estimating his finish. "We're right on pace for a sub-3-hour finish," he told Brooks. "The descent should be fast." Hansen approached the pair as they prepared to leave the aid station. "You folks need to be extra careful on the descent," he said. "We've seen a lot of fresh bear sign today, and that means there's a big grizzly somewhere in this area. Make noise, especially in thick cover or around blind corners." Brooks felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She had been so focused on her race performance that she had barely thought about wildlife, despite carrying bear spray on her belt. Now the reality of her situation hit her. She was 15 miles from the nearest road, running through prime grizzly habitat during the most dangerous time of year. Meyer's medical training kicked in as he processed Hansen's warning. He thought about the massive trauma that bear attacks inflicted, the complex reconstructive surgeries he had seen in medical journals, the high mortality rates associated with grizzly encounters. Part of him wanted to stop right there and wait for a ride out, but he had trained too hard to quit when he was feeling strong. "We'll be careful," Meyer told Hansen. "Thanks for the heads up." At 10:22 a.m., Brooks and Meyer left the Beaver Creek Pass aid station and began their descent toward the finish line. The trail dropped steeply through open meadows before plunging back into dense forest, following an old logging road that had been reclaimed by the wilderness. The running was fast and technical, requiring constant attention to footing on the rocky, uneven surface. For the first mile of the descent, they maintained their partnership, running side by side and calling out obstacles to each other. The pace was exhilarating after the grinding climb, and both runners felt their confidence building as they covered ground quickly. The forest was beautiful in the morning light, with golden aspen leaves fluttering in the gentle breeze and the distant peaks of the Spanish Peaks Range visible through breaks in the canopy. At mile 16.8, the trail entered a section of particularly dense forest where a 2018 wildfire had created massive blowdown. Fallen trees that had been cut to maintain the trail, but left tall stumps and thick brush on both sides. Visibility was limited to just a few yards in any direction, and the trail twisted and turned to avoid the worst of the debris. It was exactly the kind of terrain where bears like to bed down during the day, hidden from disturbance and close to water. Meyer was beginning to feel the effects of their fast descent, and his legs were starting to tire from the constant braking required on the steep, technical trail. He had fallen slightly behind Brooks, who was proving to be an excellent downhill runner with an intuitive sense for choosing the best line through the rock gardens and root systems. "I need to slow down a bit," Meyer called ahead to Brooks, who was about 20 yards in front of him. "My quads are starting to cramp." Brooks heard him, but was in a zone, flowing down the trail with the kind of effortless rhythm that made all her training worthwhile. She slowed slightly, but didn't stop, calling back over her shoulder, "I'll wait for you at the next aid station." This decision, to separate by a few hundred yards on a narrow, winding trail through prime bear habitat, would prove to be the crucial factor in what happened next. Running together, Brooks and Meyer had been making enough noise to alert wildlife to their presence from a considerable distance. Separated, each running alone through the forest, they became much more vulnerable to a surprise encounter. The grizzly that would change their lives forever was a massive male, estimated by wildlife officials at approximately 500 pounds and 15 years old. He had been feeding along Beaver Creek since before dawn, gorging himself on the last of the season's huckleberries in preparation for hibernation. The bear had consumed over 8,000 calories that morning alone, stripping berries from bushes with mechanical efficiency as his body prepared for the long winter sleep. At 27 years old, the bear was entering the final phase of his life. No longer the dominant force he had once been, but still immensely powerful and increasingly unpredictable. Older bears often became more aggressive as their physical abilities declined, less able to compete for prime feeding areas and more likely to defend resources with violence. This particular bear had been involved in 3 previous encounters with humans over the past 5 years, including a 2021 incident where he had destroyed a campsite in Yellowstone while a family cowered in their RV just yards away. The bear's behavior that October morning was driven by desperation that humans could barely comprehend. He needed to gain approximately 400 more pounds before hibernation, consuming roughly 20,000 calories per day to build the fat reserves that would sustain him through 6 months of winter sleep. Every berry, every pine nut, every calorie was crucial to his survival. The approach of winter was written in his DNA, driving him to feed with an intensity that overrode normal caution and avoidance behaviors. When the bear first detected human scent, carried on the morning breeze, his initial instinct was to move away from the trail. Grizzlies generally avoided human contact when possible, preferring to feed undisturbed in areas where they could focus entirely on foraging. But this bear was in the middle of the richest huckleberry patch he had found all season, a south-facing slope where the berries were still ripe and abundant, while other areas had already been stripped bare by wildlife and frost. The decision to remain in the area rather than retreat to less productive feeding grounds was a calculated risk that demonstrated the bear's desperation. He moved deeper into the thick brush beside the trail, continuing to feed while monitoring the approaching human sounds. His plan, if it could be called that, was to remain hidden until the disturbance passed, then return to his feeding. What the bear hadn't anticipated was the marathon's staggered timing, with runners passing through his territory in waves rather than as a single group. He had successfully avoided the first wave of runners, crouching motionless in the thick brush as they passed just yards away, their voices and footsteps masking his presence. But as the morning progressed and more humans continued to invade his feeding area, the bear's stress levels rose. Each group that passed forced him to stop feeding and hide, interrupting his critical foraging time. By 10:25 a.m., when Brooks approached the area alone, the bear had been disturbed 4 times in the past hour. His patience was exhausted, his stress hormones were elevated, and his massive body was demanding that he resume feeding. When he heard Brooks's footsteps approaching on the trail, something in his behavior shifted from avoidance to territorial aggression. Brooks was running smoothly down the trail, her attention focused on the technical footing and her growing confidence about finishing strong. She had pulled away from Maya and was making excellent time on the descent, feeling that runner's high that came from perfect conditions and peak fitness. The forest was quiet except for her footsteps and breathing, the kind of solitude that had drawn her to trail running in the first place. She was moving fast enough that she covered the 20 yards from the trail bend to the bear's position in less than 10 seconds, not nearly enough time for either species to process the encounter and react appropriately. The bear, startled by her sudden appearance after successfully hiding from previous runners, exploded from the brush in what wildlife experts would later classify as a defensive attack triggered by surprise and proximity. The first Brooks knew of the bear's presence was a crashing sound in the brush to her left, followed immediately by the sight of a massive brown shape charging directly at her. Her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. The bear was enormous, far larger than any animal she had ever encountered, moving with shocking speed across the narrow gap between the brush and the trail. Training and instinct took over. Brooks tried to follow the protocol she had learned at the pre-race briefing, raising her arms to appear larger and backing away, while speaking in what she hoped was a calm voice. "Hey, bear, I'm not a threat," she called out, her voice cracking with terror. "I'm leaving." But the bear was already committed to his charge, covering the final yards to the trail in powerful bounds that shook the ground under Brooks's feet. She reached for her bear spray but fumbled the canister in her panic, watching in horror as it bounced off the trail and disappeared into the brush. The impact, when it came, was unlike anything Brooks could have imagined. The bear struck her with the force of a small vehicle, his 500-pound bulk driving her off the trail and into the rocky area beside the path. She felt ribs crack under the initial impact, the air driven from her lungs as she hit the ground hard. The bear's first instinct was to pin his perceived threat, using his massive forepaws to hold Brooks against the ground while he assessed the situation. His claws, each as long as a human finger, punched through her running shirt and into the flesh of her back and shoulders. Brooks screamed, a sound that carried through the forest like nothing else could. Maya, running 200 yards behind, heard the scream and immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. The sound was pure terror, unlike anything in his experience as an emergency physician. He sprinted toward the noise, covering ground as fast as the rocky trail allowed, while trying to process what he might be running into. The bear's attack on Brooks was methodical and devastating. After pinning her to the ground, he bit down on her left shoulder, his massive canine teeth penetrating muscle and grinding against bone. Brooks's screams became even more desperate as she felt the crushing pressure of jaws that could snap a moose's neck without effort. Grizzly attacks typically follow one of two patterns: defensive attacks, where the bear tries to neutralize a perceived threat, or predatory attacks, where the bear views the human as food. The initial phase of Brooks's mauling showed characteristics of both, as the confused and stressed bear tried to establish dominance while also investigating whether this struggling creature represented a food source. Brooks fought back with desperate strength, punching and clawing at the bear's face and trying to protect her head and neck with her arms. Her trail-running fitness served her well in the initial moments, giving her the strength to keep fighting even as massive trauma accumulated throughout her body. But she was losing blood rapidly from the shoulder wound, and the bear's weight was making it difficult to breathe. Maya rounded the final bend in the trail at a dead sprint, emerging into the scene of carnage that would haunt his dreams for years afterward. The bear was on top of Brooks in a clearing beside the trail, his massive head buried in her shoulder while she screamed and fought beneath him. Blood was everywhere, soaking into the forest floor, spattering the nearby trees, staining the bear's brown fur a darker shade. Maya's medical training kicked in even as his mind reeled from the horror of the scene. He could see that Brooks was still conscious and fighting, which meant her airway was clear and her brain was still receiving oxygen. But the volume of blood loss was alarming, and the bear showed no signs of ending his attack. Without thinking about his own safety, Maya began shouting at the bear, trying to distract the animal from Brooks. "Hey! Over here! Leave her alone!" He waved his arms and threw rocks, anything to draw the bear's attention away from his victim. The bear's head snapped up at the new sound, his small eyes focusing on Maya with malevolent intelligence. For a moment the forest fell silent, except for Brooks's ragged breathing and the bear's heavy panting. Then the massive predator made a decision that would escalate the encounter from a single mauling to a double tragedy. Instead of fleeing or returning his attention to Brooks, the bear charged Maya with the same explosive speed he had shown in the initial attack. Maya had his bear spray ready and deployed it as soon as the bear came within range, sending a stream of concentrated capsicum toward the animal's face. But his aim was off due to adrenaline and fear, and most of the spray missed its target. The small amount of bear spray that did make contact only seemed to enrage the animal further. Maya tried to run, abandoning all the advice about not triggering a bear's chase instinct, but he had waited too long. The bear covered the distance between them in seconds, striking Maya from behind with enough force to drive him face first into a fallen log. The impact broke Maya's nose and opened a gash across his forehead, but worse was the bear's immediate follow-up attack. Unlike the methodical mauling of Brooks, the bear's assault on Maya was pure fury, a series of rapid bites and claw swipes that were clearly intended to kill rather than subdue. The bear bit down on the back of Maya's neck, his canine teeth seeking the cervical vertebrae that would end the threat permanently. Only Maya's instinctive effort to protect his neck with his hands saved his life in those first crucial seconds, though the cost was devastating trauma to both arms as the bear's teeth and claws found flesh. Brooks, despite her own severe injuries, witnessed Maya's attack with growing horror. She could see that the bear was trying to kill him and that Maya's desperate defensive efforts were failing. Summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Brooks grabbed a fallen branch and began striking the bear's hindquarters, trying to distract him from his attack on Maya. The bear's response was swift and brutal. He spun away from Maya and charged Brooks again, this time with the unmistakable intent of a predatory attack. He bit down on her left leg just above the knee, his teeth punching through the femur with a crack that echoed through the forest. Brooks screamed again, but the sound was weaker now, her body shutting down from blood loss and shock. Maya, his face a mask of blood from his head wounds, struggled to his feet and resumed throwing rocks and shouting, desperate to keep the bear's attention divided between two targets. His strategy was based on the hope that the bear would eventually decide the encounter was too costly and retreat. But he was beginning to realize that this particular animal was beyond reason. The bear's behavior had shifted into something that wildlife experts call predatory persistence, a rare but documented phenomenon where a bear becomes completely focused on killing and consuming its prey, ignoring injuries and deterrents that would normally cause it to flee. This behavior was most commonly seen in starving bears or animals whose normal behavioral patterns had been disrupted by injury or old age. For the next several minutes, the bear alternated between attacking Brooks and Maya, preventing either victim from escaping while inflicting massive trauma. Brooks suffered additional bites to her right arm and torso, while Maya endured claw wounds across his back and a crushing bite to his left thigh that would later require reconstructive surgery. The turning point in the encounter came when Maya, in desperation, managed to grab a heavy rock and strike the bear directly on the nose with all his remaining strength. The blow stunned the animal long enough for Maya to deploy his bear spray effectively, sending a concentrated stream directly into the bear's eyes and nostrils from close range. The spray's effect was immediate and dramatic. The bear reeled backward, pawing at his face and snorting to clear the caustic substance from his respiratory system. For the first time since the attack began, the animal's attention was focused entirely on his own distress rather than on his human victims. Maya grabbed Brooks under her arms and began dragging her away from the immediate area, though her left leg was useless and she was fading in and out of consciousness from blood loss. He managed to move her perhaps 30 yards down the trail before his own injuries forced him to stop. Both runners were now in critical condition, miles from help in one of the most remote areas of the Montana wilderness. The bear, still affected by the spray but recovering quickly, began following their blood trail. His predatory instincts were fully engaged now, and he showed no signs of abandoning his prey. Maya realized that their only hope was to reach other runners or the next aid station. But Brooks was too severely injured to move quickly, and he was weakening rapidly from his own trauma. Behind them on the trail, Walsh and Bradley were making steady progress down the mountain, unaware of the carnage that awaited them just ahead. They had been running together since Beaver Creek Pass, making noise and staying alert for wildlife sign. As experienced outdoors people, both sensed that something was wrong even before they could identify what it was. "Do you smell that?" Walsh asked as they approached the area where the attack had occurred. The metallic scent of blood was heavy in the air, along with the musky odor that experienced bear country travelers associated with grizzlies. Bradley slowed to a walk, his photographer's instincts telling him to proceed with extreme caution. "That's blood," he said quietly. "A lot of it." They rounded the final bend and emerged into a scene that neither would ever forget. The area beside the trail looked like a slaughterhouse. Blood spattered across trees and rocks, the ground torn up by massive claws and drag marks leading away from the main impact site. But most horrifying was the continued sound of struggle somewhere ahead, the desperate shouts of someone fighting for their life. Walsh immediately keyed the emergency whistle that all runners carried, sending 3 sharp blasts echoing through the forest, the universal signal for a wilderness emergency. She and Bradley ran toward the sounds of struggle, knowing they were about to confront a situation that would test every aspect of their wilderness training. They found Maya attempting to shield the unconscious Brooks, while the massive grizzly circled them like a predator toying with wounded prey. The bear was still affected by the spray, but clearly preparing for another attack, his massive head swinging back and forth as he sought an opening. Walsh and Bradley split up instinctively, approaching from different angles to divide the bear's attention. Both had their bear spray ready and began making aggressive noise, shouting, clapping and throwing rocks to convince the bear that he was now outnumbered and outmatched. "Back off!" Walsh yelled at the bear, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced grizzlies before. "Get out of here!" The bear's response was to charge Walsh with the same explosive speed he had shown in attacking Brooks and Maya, but Walsh was prepared and uninjured, giving her crucial advantages in reaction time and mobility. She deployed her bear spray in a perfect defensive pattern, creating a wall of capsicum between herself and the charging bear. This time, the spray was fully effective. The bear ran directly into the caustic cloud and immediately veered away, his attack disrupted by the burning sensation in his eyes and respiratory system. He crashed into the brush beside the trail, snorting and pawing at his face, while his three human adversaries backed away toward the main trail. Bradley helped Maya support the semi-conscious Brooks, while Walsh maintained watch on the bear. Her second canister of spray ready for immediate use. The animal was clearly frustrated and still dangerous, but the multiple doses of spray had finally convinced him that this particular prey was too costly to pursue. After several tense minutes, the bear began moving away from the area, crashing through the forest in the direction of Beaver Creek. Walsh waited until the sounds of his retreat had faded completely before turning her attention to the injured runners. Maya was still conscious, but clearly in shock from blood loss and trauma. His face was a mask of blood from the head wounds, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. Brooks was unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid, classic signs of severe blood loss and impending circulatory collapse. "We need to get them to the aid station," Walsh told Bradley. "Brooks is going into shock, and they're both losing too much blood." The nearest aid station was still 2 miles away, but it was their only hope for accessing emergency communications and advanced medical care. Bradley fashioned a makeshift stretcher from his jacket and a fallen branch, while Walsh applied pressure to Brooks's most severe wounds using torn pieces of her own running shirt. The evacuation that followed was a nightmare of endurance and determination. Maya was able to walk with assistance, though his left leg could barely support his weight, and he grew weaker with each step. Brooks had to be carried on the improvised stretcher, her weight distributed between Walsh and Bradley as they navigated the rocky, technical trail. The 2-mile journey to the aid station took over an hour, with frequent stops to check Brooks's vital signs and adjust their improvised first aid. Walsh's search and rescue training proved invaluable as she managed their limited medical supplies and made critical decisions about treating trauma in the wilderness. They reached the Mile 19 aid station at 11:47 a.m., nearly 90 minutes after the initial attack. The volunteers there, 2 local EMTs named Rodriguez and Thompson, immediately radioed for helicopter evacuation while beginning advanced trauma care. Brooks was unconscious with weak, rapid pulse and dangerously low blood pressure. Her left shoulder had been severely damaged by the bear's bite, with massive tissue damage and possible nerve involvement. The bite to her left leg had fractured the femur and caused severe bleeding that was barely controlled by Walsh's field dressings. Maya was conscious but showing signs of severe blood loss. His head wounds, while dramatic, were superficial compared to the massive trauma to his left arm and thigh. The bear's bite to his arm had damaged major muscle groups and possibly severed tendons, while the thigh wound involved significant blood vessels that continued to seep despite pressure dressings. The helicopter evacuation was complicated by weather and terrain. Low clouds had moved in during the morning, forcing the flight crew to navigate by instrument through the mountain passes. The landing zone had to be cleared of trees and rocks, with volunteers working frantically to create a space large enough for the aircraft. Mercy Flight, the regional air ambulance service, launched 2 helicopters from Billings, 1 for each victim. The flight crews included trauma physicians and nurses trained in wilderness medicine, but even they were shocked by the extent of the injuries they encountered. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the flight physician on Brooks's helicopter, later described the patient's condition as the worst bear mauling trauma I've seen in 15 years of emergency medicine. Brooks had lost an estimated 40% of her blood volume and was in profound shock. Her left shoulder was essentially destroyed, with massive tissue loss and exposed bone. The femur fracture was open and contaminated with debris from the forest floor. The flight to Bozeman Health took 18 minutes, with Martinez and her team working continuously to stabilize Brooks's blood pressure and manage her airway. They administered 4 units of blood products during the flight and placed bilateral chest tubes due to concern about punctured lungs from the rib fractures. Maya's helicopter, crewed by Dr. James Wilson and flight nurse Katie Chen, faced different but equally serious challenges. Maya remained conscious during the flight, which allowed him to describe the attack in detail while receiving treatment. His head wounds required extensive suturing, and the damage to his left arm was severe enough to raise concerns about permanent disability. The bear just wouldn't stop, Maya told Dr. Wilson during the flight. It kept coming back over and over. If Jennifer and Tom hadn't shown up when they did, we'd both be dead. News of the attack spread quickly through the marathon community and then to the broader public. Chen had suspended the race immediately upon learning of the mauling, directing all remaining runners to the nearest aid station for evacuation by vehicle. The final 89 runners were transported out by ATV and rescue vehicles, many of them shaken by their close proximity to such a violent encounter. The first media reports appeared within hours, initially focusing on the dramatic rescue and the condition of the victims. But as details emerged about the attack itself, the size of the bear, the duration of the encounter, the role of other runners in driving off the animal, the story captured national attention. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks immediately launched an investigation into the incident, dispatching bear management specialists to the attack site within hours. The investigation was led by Jake Morrison, a bear biologist with 15 years of experience studying grizzly behavior in the Northern Rockies. Morrison's team found extensive physical evidence at the attack site, including paw prints, claw marks, and blood evidence that confirmed the victims' accounts. The bear's tracks indicated an animal of exceptional size, estimated at 500 pounds based on the paw measurements. Hair samples recovered from the scene would later provide DNA evidence for identifying the specific individual responsible. This was clearly a large, mature male in hyperphagia, Morrison explained to reporters the following day. The bear was in peak feeding mode, preparing for hibernation, and was extremely aggressive in defending what he perceived as his territory. The decision about whether to pursue and destroy the bear would prove controversial. Wildlife advocates argued that the bear was simply following natural instincts in its own habitat, while others demanded immediate action to prevent future attacks. The debate reflected the broader tension between wilderness recreation and wildlife conservation in areas where grizzly populations were recovering. At Bozeman Health, Brooks underwent emergency surgery that lasted 7 hours. The trauma team, led by orthopedic surgeon Dr. Michael Chang and plastic surgeon Dr. Lisa Park, worked to repair the devastating damage to her shoulder and leg. The shoulder wound had destroyed major muscle groups and damaged the brachial plexus, the network of nerves controlling arm function. The bear's bite essentially crushed everything in the shoulder region, Dr. Chang explained to Brooks's family. We've stabilized the immediate trauma, but she's facing months of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation. The nerve damage is particularly concerning. The femur fracture required insertion of a titanium rod and multiple screws to stabilize the bone. The extensive soft tissue damage around the wound raised serious concerns about infection. particularly given the contamination from the forest environment and the bear's mouth. Maya's surgery was less extensive, but equally complex. The damage to his left arm required repair of multiple tendons and muscles, with plastic surgery to address the massive claw wounds across his back. The head wounds, while dramatic, healed quickly with proper suturing. Alan was incredibly lucky, said Dr. Patricia Wong, who assisted in his surgery. The bear's bite to his neck missed the major vessels and spine by millimeters. If those teeth had found their target, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Both patients faced long recoveries with uncertain outcomes. Brooks remained in intensive care for 10 days, fighting off infections and complications from her massive trauma. Maya was released after 4 days, but faced months of physical therapy to regain function in his damaged arm. The psychological trauma proved as challenging as the physical injuries. Both victims suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, with symptoms including nightmares, flashbacks, and panic attacks triggered by outdoor environments. The sound of wind in trees, the scent of pine forests, even the sight of large dogs could trigger intense anxiety responses. Brooks found herself unable to return to trail running, the activity that had defined her identity for years. "I can't even walk on forest trails anymore," she admitted during a television interview 6 months after the attack. "My brain knows the difference between a rational fear and an irrational one, but my body doesn't care." Maya struggled with similar issues, compounded by his medical training that made him acutely aware of how close he had come to death. "I keep thinking about the seconds when the bear had me pinned," he said during a therapy session, "how easily it could have gone differently. How fragile we really are." The investigation into the bear's behavior revealed a complex picture of an aging predator pushed to extremes by environmental pressures. The 2024 growing season had been challenging in the northern Rockies, with late spring snow and an early fall frost reducing the availability of natural food sources. Bears throughout the region were showing signs of nutritional stress, leading to increased conflicts with humans. Morrison's team spent 2 weeks tracking the specific bear responsible for the attack, using DNA evidence and behavioral analysis to distinguish him from other grizzlies in the area. Trail cameras positioned near the attack site captured images of the massive male, confirming the size estimates and providing valuable data about his movement patterns. "This bear was operating on the edge of his natural range," Morrison explained. "He was an older animal, probably displaced by younger, stronger bears from prime feeding areas. That kind of stress can make any predator more dangerous." The decision about the bear's fate remained controversial throughout the investigation. Wildlife advocates organized protests demanding that the bear be relocated rather than destroyed, arguing that he was simply following natural instincts in his own habitat. Victims' advocates countered that public safety required the removal of an animal that had shown extreme aggression toward humans. The debate intensified when Morrison's team discovered that this was likely the same bear involved in 2 previous incidents, a 2021 campsite destruction in Yellowstone and a 2022 encounter with hikers near Glacier National Park. The pattern suggested an animal that had lost its natural fear of humans, making future conflicts almost inevitable. "At some point, public safety has to take precedence," argued Gallatin County Sheriff David Miller. "This bear has demonstrated a willingness to attack humans multiple times. We can't just hope it won't happen again." On October 18th, 12 days after the marathon attack, the bear was located by tracking teams approximately 15 miles from the original encounter site. He was destroyed by wildlife officials using a high-powered rifle, ending a life that had spanned nearly 3 decades in the Montana wilderness. The decision sparked immediate controversy. Environmental groups condemned the killing as an example of human arrogance, pointing out that the bear had been in his natural habitat when the attacks occurred. "We invaded his territory," said Amanda Foster, a spokesperson for the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. "Then we killed him for defending it." Others, including the victims' families, supported the decision as necessary for public safety. "That bear had to be stopped," said Brooks's father, Robert Brooks. "No one else should have to go through what Samantha and Alan experienced." The legal aftermath of the attack proved almost as complex as the investigation itself. Brooks and Meyer both filed lawsuits against the race organizers, alleging inadequate safety precautions and failure to warn participants about known bear activity in the area. The suits claimed that Chen and his staff knew about the fresh bear sign along the course, but failed to take appropriate action to protect runners. Chen's legal team argued that wilderness recreation inherently involves risks that participants assume when they choose to enter wildlife habitat. They pointed to the extensive safety briefings, the requirement that runners carry bear spray, and the liability waivers signed by all participants. "Every runner knew they were entering grizzly country," argued defense attorney Maria Santos. "They were warned about the risks, given safety equipment, and briefed on proper protocols. Sometimes, despite all precautions, tragic encounters occur in the wilderness." The case highlighted broader questions about liability and risk management in wilderness recreation. As more people sought outdoor adventures in areas with recovering wildlife populations, the potential for human-wildlife conflicts increased dramatically. Race organizers, park managers, and outdoor recreation companies all grappled with how to balance access and safety in predator habitat. The civil litigation dragged on for 2 years before reaching a settlement in October 2026. Terms were confidential, but both victims received substantial compensation for their medical expenses and ongoing care needs. Chen's race organization agreed to enhanced safety protocols for future events, including armed escorts in high-risk areas and real-time wildlife monitoring. The Big Sky Mountain Marathon continued in 2025 and 2026, though with significantly enhanced safety measures and a modified course that avoided the most remote wilderness areas. Participation dropped by nearly 60% in the years following the attack, as many runners sought events with lower wildlife risks. Brooks never returned to competitive running. The physical limitations imposed by her injuries made it impossible to maintain the training volume required for marathon racing, while the psychological trauma made wilderness environments intolerable. She eventually moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where the desert landscape held no reminders of her Montana nightmare. "I lost more than function in my arm and leg," Brooks reflected during a 2027 interview. "I lost my relationship with the natural world. I used to find peace in the forest. Now I can barely tolerate city parks." Meyer's recovery proved more successful, both physically and emotionally. After 18 months of intensive rehabilitation, he regained most of the function in his damaged arm and was able to return to his work as an emergency physician. However, he gave up trail running entirely, channeling his athletic pursuits into cycling and swimming. "I still love the mountains," Meyer said during a 2026 medical conference, where he spoke about treating trauma in wilderness settings. "But I appreciate them from a distance now. The bear taught me that nature doesn't care about our plans or our safety. We're visitors in that world, not masters." Walsh and Bradley, the two runners whose intervention likely saved Brooks and Meyer's lives, became reluctant heroes in the trail running community. Both continued to race and spend time in wilderness areas, though they advocated strongly for enhanced bear safety education and equipment requirements. "People need to understand that bear spray isn't magic," Walsh explained during a wilderness safety seminar. "It's a tool that has to be used properly and quickly. In a life or death situation, you might only get one chance to deploy it effectively." Bradley used his experience to create a documentary about bear safety and wilderness recreation, featuring interviews with attack survivors, wildlife biologists, and emergency responders. The film became a standard training tool for outdoor education programs throughout North America. The attack also led to significant changes in bear management policies throughout the Northern Rockies. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks increased funding for human-wildlife conflict prevention programs and implemented new protocols for monitoring bear behavior during hyperphagia periods. The Big Sky attack was a wake-up call, explained Morrison, the bear biologist who led the investigation. As grizzly populations recover and human recreation increases, we need better systems for preventing conflicts before they become tragedies. New technologies played an increasingly important role in these prevention efforts. Trail cameras, motion sensors, and GPS tracking systems allowed wildlife managers to monitor bear movements in real time and issue immediate warnings when large predators were detected near popular recreation areas. Race organizers throughout the region adopted new safety standards that included mandatory bear safety training, requirements for carrying bear spray, and protocols for canceling events when dangerous wildlife activity was detected. Some events began hiring professional wildlife monitors to patrol courses during races. The medical community also learned valuable lessons from treating the Big Sky victims. Emergency physicians, trauma surgeons, and wilderness medicine specialists developed new protocols for managing bear attack injuries, particularly the complex wounds caused by massive predator teeth and claws. Bear attacks create unique trauma patterns, explained Dr. Martinez, the flight physician who treated Brooks during her helicopter evacuation. The combination of crushing injuries, puncture wounds, and contamination requires specialized treatment approaches that we've refined based on cases like this. Training programs for emergency responders in bear country now include specific modules on treating predator attack victims, with emphasis on the need for immediate helicopter evacuation and specialized surgical care. The delays inherent in wilderness rescue scenarios make these injuries particularly challenging, requiring first responders to make critical decisions about treatment priorities and evacuation procedures. The psychological impact of the attack extended far beyond the immediate victims. Many of the 312 runners who participated in the 2024 Big Sky Marathon struggled with their own trauma responses, even though they weren't present during the actual mauling. The knowledge that they had been running the same trail just hours earlier created a form of survivor guilt and anxiety that affected their future outdoor activities. Support groups for wilderness trauma survivors became more common in the years following the attack, as mental health professionals recognized the unique challenges faced by people who had experienced or witnessed violence in natural settings. The juxtaposition of beauty and terror in wilderness environments created complex emotional responses that required specialized treatment approaches. There's something particularly disturbing about violence in places we think of as peaceful and restorative, explained Dr. Janet Morrison, a psychologist who specialized in treating outdoor recreation trauma. It disrupts our fundamental assumptions about the natural world and our place in it. The broader trail running community grappled with questions about risk tolerance and the ethics of wilderness recreation in predator habitat. Some argued that humans had a right to access public lands regardless of wildlife presence, while others advocated for seasonal closures and restricted access in areas with high predator activity. These debates reflected larger cultural tensions about the relationship between humans and wildlife in the 21st century. As apex predator populations recovered from historic lows, conflicts with human activities became increasingly common and complex. The Big Sky attack became a case study in wildlife management courses and environmental ethics programs across North America. The economic impact of the attack rippled through the outdoor recreation industry in Montana and surrounding states. Tourism to wilderness areas declined significantly in the immediate aftermath, as potential visitors sought destinations perceived as safer. Outfitters, guides, and resort operators reported substantial revenue losses in the years following the incident. Big Sky Resort itself invested heavily in bear safety infrastructure, including new warning systems, enhanced garbage management, and educational programs for guests. The resort's marketing materials began emphasizing safety alongside adventure, reflecting a new awareness of liability issues in wildlife habitat. "We can't eliminate risk entirely," explained resort manager Tom Chen, no relation to race director Marcus Chen, "but we can educate people about the realities of living and recreating in bear country. The attack was a tragedy, but it also taught us valuable lessons about coexistence." Insurance companies began requiring enhanced safety protocols for events in predator habitat, driving up costs for race organizers and outdoor recreation businesses. Some insurers refused to cover events in high-risk areas entirely, forcing organizers to seek specialized coverage at significantly higher premiums. The scientific community used the Big Sky attack as an opportunity to study grizzly bear behavior in unprecedented detail. Researchers analyzed every aspect of the encounter, from the environmental factors that led to the bear's aggressive behavior to the effectiveness of different deterrent methods. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a bear biologist at the University of Montana, no relation to the runner Jennifer Walsh, led a comprehensive study of predatory behavior in grizzly bears that was partly inspired by the Big Sky incident. Her research revealed complex patterns of aggression that challenged previous assumptions about bear behavior. "We found that older male bears in poor physical condition are significantly more likely to engage in prolonged attacks on humans," Walsh explained. "The traditional advice about playing dead doesn't apply to predatory encounters, where fighting back is the only effective strategy." This research led to updated safety recommendations for wilderness travelers, with greater emphasis on recognizing the difference between defensive and predatory bear behavior. The new guidelines stressed the importance of context, time of year, bear condition, and encounter circumstances in determining appropriate response strategies. The attack also contributed to improved bear spray technology and training methods. Manufacturers developed more effective formulations and delivery systems, while safety instructors created realistic training scenarios that prepared users for high-stress situations. "Bear spray is only effective if people can deploy it quickly and accurately under extreme stress," explained Dave Johnson, a wilderness safety instructor who had worked with both Brooks and Meyer during their recovery. "The Big Sky attack showed us that our training methods needed to be more realistic and intensive." 5 years after the attack, both victims had made remarkable physical recoveries, though neither would ever be completely whole again. Brooks had undergone 7 reconstructive surgeries on her shoulder and arm, regaining enough function to perform most daily activities. Her left leg, stabilized with titanium hardware, was slightly shorter than her right, giving her a permanent limp. Meyer's recovery was more complete, with full function returning to his damaged arm after 2 years of intensive physical therapy. The scars on his back and head served as permanent reminders of his encounter with the massive grizzly, but they didn't prevent him from returning to his career as an emergency physician. Both victims became advocates for wilderness safety education, speaking at conferences and training sessions about their experiences. They emphasized the importance of proper preparation, quality equipment, and realistic expectations about the risks involved in wilderness recreation. "I don't want people to avoid the outdoors," Brooks said during a 2029 safety conference, "but they need to understand that nature isn't a theme park. It's a dynamic system where we're just one part of the equation. Sometimes that equation includes violence, Dying. The legacy of the Big Sky Mountain Marathon attack extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. It became a defining moment in the ongoing negotiation between human recreation and wildlife conservation in the American West. The incident forced uncomfortable conversations about risk, responsibility, and the true costs of wilderness access. Educational institutions across North America incorporated the attack into their curricula, using it as a case study in fields ranging from emergency medicine to environmental management. The detailed documentation of the encounter provided researchers with unprecedented data about human-bear conflicts and the effectiveness of various intervention strategies. Wildlife management agencies used the lessons learned from the Big Sky attack to develop new protocols for managing predator populations in areas with high human use. These protocols emphasized prevention through early detection and intervention, rather than reactive measures after conflicts occurred. The attack also influenced federal wildlife policy, contributing to discussions about grizzly bear delisting and management transfer from federal to state agencies. The complexity of the incident highlighted the challenges facing managers as bear populations recovered and expanded into new territories. The Big Sky attack crystallized many of the issues we face in bear management, explained Dr. Morrison, the lead investigator. It showed us that successful conservation requires more than just protecting habitat and managing populations. We need to understand and manage the human dimension of wildlife conservation. Legal scholars analyzed the attack's implications for liability and risk allocation in wilderness recreation. The case became a landmark in outdoor recreation law, establishing precedents for how courts would handle similar incidents in the future. The Big Sky case forced the legal system to grapple with fundamental questions about assumption of risk in wilderness settings, explained Professor Sarah Martinez of the Montana Law School. It highlighted the tension between individual responsibility and institutional liability in outdoor recreation. The psychological research emerging from the attack contributed to new understanding of trauma and recovery in wilderness contexts. Mental health professionals developed specialized treatment protocols for wilderness trauma survivors, recognizing the unique challenges posed by violence in natural settings. Traditional PTSD treatment doesn't always work for wilderness trauma, explained Dr. Morrison, the psychologist who treated both victims. The association between natural environments and traumatic memories requires specialized approaches that help patients separate their trauma from their relationship with nature. As the 5th anniversary of the attack approached in 2029, the Big Sky community planned a memorial event to honor the victims and recognize the lessons learned from the tragedy. The event would feature educational presentations about bear safety, wilderness medicine, and trauma recovery, reflecting the community's commitment to preventing similar incidents. "We can't undo what happened," explained current race director Sarah Thompson, who had taken over from Marcus Chen. "But we can honor Sam and Alan by making sure their experience helps protect others. That's the only way to find meaning in such a senseless tragedy." The memorial event would also recognize the heroes of the incident, Jennifer Walsh and Tom Bradley, whose quick thinking and courage had saved 2 lives. Their actions demonstrated that even in the face of nature's most terrifying predators, human compassion and bravery could make the difference between life and death. "Jen and Tom represent the best of the trail running community," Brooks said in a statement read at the memorial. "They risked everything to help strangers, and their courage gave Alan and me a second chance at life. That's a debt we can never repay." The Big Sky Mountain Marathon resumed in 2030, 6 years after the attack, with enhanced safety protocols and a modified course that avoided the most remote wilderness areas. The race attracted 156 participants, roughly half the pre-attack numbers. but organizers considered it a success in re-establishing the event's viability. Enhanced safety measures included real-time wildlife monitoring, mandatory bear safety certification for all participants, armed escorts in high-risk areas, and immediate helicopter evacuation capabilities. The cost of these measures significantly increased entry fees, but participants accepted the additional expense as necessary for safety. "We're not the same race we were before the attack," Thompson acknowledged. "We're smaller, more expensive, and more safety-focused. But we're also more aware of our responsibilities to our participants and to the wildlife that shares this incredible landscape." The race's survival represented a broader trend in wilderness recreation, the recognition that human activities in predator habitat required new approaches that balanced access with safety and conservation. The outdoor recreation industry had matured beyond the adventure-at-any-cost mentality that had characterized earlier decades. Maya returned to the Big Sky area for the first time in 2030, not to run the marathon, but to speak at the pre-race safety briefing. His presentation, which included graphic photos of his injuries and detailed accounts of the attack, had a sobering effect on participants. "I'm not here to scare you," Maya told the assembled runners. "I'm here to make sure you understand what you're signing up for. This is grizzly country in October. That means danger is a real possibility, not just a theoretical risk." His presentation concluded with practical advice about bear encounter protocols, emergency response procedures, and the importance of running with partners in high-risk areas. Several participants withdrew from the race after hearing his talk, a decision Maya supported. "Better to disappoint someone by withdrawing than to traumatize them with an encounter they're not prepared for," he explained. "This sport should push your limits, but it shouldn't risk your life unnecessarily." Brooks chose not to attend the 2030 race, though she provided a written statement of support for the enhanced safety measures. Her recovery had progressed to the point where she could hike on well-maintained trails near her Phoenix home, but the Montana wilderness remained psychologically inaccessible. "I'm proud of what the Big Sky community has accomplished," her statement read. "They've taken a tragedy and used it to create something better and safer. I hope other events will follow their example." The scientific legacy of the attack continued to evolve as researchers published new findings about grizzly bear behavior, wilderness medicine, and trauma psychology. The comprehensive documentation of the incident provided data that influenced wildlife management policies across North America. Dr. Walsh's research on predatory behavior in aging male grizzlies led to new management protocols for dealing with problem bears. Rather than waiting for conflicts to occur, wildlife managers began proactively monitoring and, when necessary, relocating bears that showed signs of increased aggression or habituation to humans. The Big Sky bear was probably manageable if we had recognized the warning signs earlier, Walsh explained. His previous encounters should have triggered intervention before he became truly dangerous. This proactive approach required significant investment in monitoring technology and personnel, but early results suggested it was effective in reducing serious human-bear conflicts. Wildlife managers reported fewer predatory encounters in areas where the new protocols were implemented. The medical advances inspired by treating the attack victims contributed to improved outcomes for wilderness trauma patients throughout the region. Emergency departments developed specialized protocols for bear attack injuries, while helicopter evacuation services invested in equipment and training specifically designed for wilderness rescues. Every bear attack victim since 2024 has benefited from what we learned treating Sam and Alan, explained Dr. Martinez, who had become a leading expert in wilderness trauma medicine. "We know more about these injuries and how to treat them than ever before." The psychological research emerging from the attack's aftermath influenced treatment approaches for outdoor recreation trauma across multiple disciplines. Therapists, wilderness guides, and safety instructors all incorporated new understanding of trauma's relationship to natural environments. The Big Sky attack taught us that our relationship with nature is more fragile than we realized, explained Dr. Morrison. Traumatic encounters don't just affect individuals, they can fundamentally alter how entire communities relate to wilderness areas. As the decade progressed, the Big Sky attack became a reference point for discussions about risk and responsibility in outdoor recreation. Safety professionals used it as a case study for demonstrating the importance of preparation, training, and realistic risk assessment. The incident also influenced popular culture, inspiring documentaries, books, and even fictional accounts that explored the complex relationship between humans and predators. These works helped maintain public awareness of wilderness safety issues while honoring the experiences of the victims and survivors. Brooks and Meyer, now in their 40s, had built new lives shaped but not defined by their traumatic encounter. Both had married and started families, finding joy and meaning beyond the tragedy that had nearly claimed their lives. "The bear took a lot from me," Brooks reflected during a 2035 interview marking the 10th anniversary of the attack. "But it also taught me what really matters. Every day since October 6, 2024, has been a gift." Meyer echoed similar sentiments, though he acknowledged that the psychological scars remained. "I still have nightmares sometimes," he admitted, "but I also have a deeper appreciation for life and relationships. The bear showed me how quickly everything can change." Their stories continued to inspire others facing trauma and recovery, demonstrating that even the most devastating encounters could be survived and transcended. The legacy of their courage and resilience extended far beyond the trail-running community to touch anyone grappling with life-altering trauma. The wilderness where the attack occurred remained largely unchanged, a testament to the enduring power of natural systems beyond human intervention. New grizzly bears moved into the territory, once claimed by the massive male, continuing the ancient cycles of predation and survival that had shaped the northern Rockies for millennia. The forest had absorbed the blood, the screams, and the violence of that October morning, leaving only subtle signs for those who knew how to read them. New growth covered the disturbed soil, while the cycles of life and death continued according to rhythms far older than human memory. "Nature doesn't remember our tragedies," Walsh observed during a return visit to the area in 2035. "But we do. And that memory is what allows us to learn, to adapt, and to find ways to coexist." The Big Sky Mountain Marathon attack had become more than a wilderness tragedy. It was a defining moment in the evolution of human-wildlife relationships in the 21st century. The lessons learned from those terrifying moments beside a mountain trail continued to influence policies, practices, and perspectives throughout North America and beyond. The story of October 6, 2024, served as a reminder that wilderness was not a playground, but a complex ecosystem where humans were visitors, not masters. It demonstrated the importance of humility, preparation, and respect when entering the domains of apex predators. Most importantly, it showed that even in the face of nature's most terrifying manifestations, human courage, compassion, and determination could triumph over despair. The actions of Jennifer Walsh and Tom Bradley, the survival of Samantha Brooks and Alan Meyer, and the community's response to tragedy all testified to the resilience of the human spirit. As new generations of wilderness enthusiasts prepared to explore the mountains, forests, and wild places of North America, they carried with them the hard-won wisdom of those who had faced the ultimate test and survived. The Big Sky attack would forever stand as both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder that adventure and tragedy were often separated by the thinnest of margins, But that proper preparation, good judgment, and human solidarity could tip the balance toward survival. The grizzly bear that had changed so many lives with one desperate act was gone, but the wilderness remained. It waited with the same beautiful indifference it had always shown, ready to challenge and test those brave enough to enter its domain. And those who came prepared, respectful, and aware of their place in the larger ecosystem would find, as generations before them had found, that the mountains held both danger and transcendence in equal measure. The story of Bear Mall's marathon runners, October 6, 2024, had ended, but its lessons would endure as long as humans sought to test themselves against the wild places of the earth. In the end, that was perhaps the most fitting memorial to the victims and survivors of that terrible morning, the knowledge that their experience would help protect others who shared their love of the mountains and their willingness to accept the risks that came with that love. The next stories: Kodiak Bear kills two brothers on hunting trip, September 28, 2024. The morning of September 25, 2024, dawned crisp and clear across Afognak Island, Alaska, the kind of pristine autumn day that made Mark Cole's chest swell with anticipation as he loaded the final gear bag into their chartered float plane. At 34, Mark had been dreaming of this hunting trip for 3 years, meticulously planning every detail with the methodical precision that had made him successful in his consulting business back in Denver. His younger brother Ryan, 29 and built like the college linebacker he'd once been, hoisted their rifle cases with an easy strength that belied his excitement. "Jesus, Mark, you packed enough gear for a month," Ryan laughed, his breath forming small clouds in the 40-degree air as they stood on the dock at Kodiak Airport's seaplane base. "We're only going for 4 days. Mark adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and consulted his waterproof notebook for the 12th time that morning. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Dad always said that. The mention of their father, killed in a car accident 2 years prior, brought a momentary silence between them. This trip was as much about honoring his memory as it was about the elk they hoped to bag. Their guide, Thomas "Tom" Beaumont, a weathered 56-year-old Kodiak native with 30 years of guiding experience, watched the brothers with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every type of hunter come through Alaska. Mark struck him as the over-preparer type, the kind who read every manual and watched every YouTube video, but had never actually tested himself against the true Alaskan wilderness. Ryan seemed more naturally athletic, but carried that cocky confidence Tom had seen get hunters into trouble before. "Weather forecast looks good for the next 3 days, Tom said, spitting tobacco juice into a paper cup as he reviewed their gear manifest. "Day 4 might see some weather coming in from the west, but we should be fine. Afognak's got some of the best elk hunting in Alaska, and this time of year, just before the rut really kicks in, they're moving good." The third member of their party, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a 42-year-old emergency physician from Anchorage, finished securing her medical kit in the plane. Jennifer had won this hunt in a charity auction for the Alaska Wildlife Foundation, bidding $12,000 for what was normally a $15,000 guided hunt. As a trauma surgeon who'd treated countless hunting accidents and bear maulings over her 15-year career, she was acutely aware of the dangers they might face. But the opportunity to hunt Roosevelt elk in their native habitat was too compelling to pass up. "Tom, remind me about the bear situation on Afognak," Jennifer said, her practical nature asserting itself even as excitement buzzed through her system. "I know Kodiak Island proper has the highest density of brown bears in the world, but what about Afognak?" Tom's expression grew more serious. "Afognak's got plenty of bears, Doc. Maybe not quite as dense as Kodiak, but they're there. Big ones too. Island bears grow bigger than mainland bears because of the salmon runs." We're talking 8 to 1,200 pounds for adult males, sometimes bigger. This time of year, they're feeding heavy on salmon and berries, putting on weight for winter. That can make them unpredictable. The fourth hunter in their group, Michael Bear Harrison, a 47-year-old oil rig supervisor from Prudhoe Bay, let out a dismissive snort. His nickname had nothing to do with the animals they might encounter and everything to do with his massive 6'4", 280-pound frame and his habit of wrestling his co-workers for entertainment. Hell, I've been hunting in Alaska for 20 years, never had a problem with bears. Make enough noise, give them space, and they'll leave you alone. Tom nodded, but his eyes held a warning. That's usually true, Bear, but not always. These Kodiak Browns are different. They're apex predators that ain't afraid of much. And with 4 hunters moving through their territory, even being careful, we might have an encounter. That's why we carry the bear spray, and why I've got this. He patted the Marlin 45-70 rifle slung across his shoulder. 10-gauge slug gun, too, in case we need serious stopping power. Their pilot, Captain Sarah Morrison, a former Air Force transport pilot who'd been flying Alaska's wilderness for 8 years since leaving the service, completed her pre-flight inspection and called out to the group, "All right, folks, we're looking at about a 45-minute flight to our drop-off point on the northeast shore of Afognak. Weather's cooperative, winds are light, and we should have you on the ground by 11 a.m. The fifth and final member of their expedition, Alex Chen, a 26-year-old wildlife photographer from Seattle, checked his camera equipment one last time. Alex had paid his own way to document the hunt for a magazine article about Alaska's hunting culture. His Canon 5D Mark IV and telephoto lenses were secured in waterproof cases, along with backup batteries and memory cards. "Tom, what are the chances we'll see bears while we're hunting?" "I'd love to get some shots, from a safe distance, of course." "Pretty good chance," Tom replied. "Bears and elk share a lot of the same habitat. Creek bottoms, berry patches, meadows. The bears know where the elk are too, sometimes following the herds. Just remember, if we see bears, the cameras go away and we focus on safety. These ain't zoo animals." Mark pulled out his detailed topographical map of Afognak Island, the kind with 20-foot contour intervals that showed every creek, ridge, and elevation change. He'd studied this map for hours, memorizing the terrain features around their planned hunting areas. "Tom, remind me again about our base camp location. I want to make sure I understand the geography." Tom spread the map across the plane's wing and pointed to a spot on the northeastern coast. "We're setting up here, about 2 miles inland from Ocean View Creek. There's a good flat spot for tents, fresh water, and it's positioned well for hunting 3 different areas. To the north, we've got that big meadow complex, where elk like to feed in the mornings. East of us is heavy timber where they bed down during the day, and south, there's a series of creek bottoms that they use as travel corridors." Jennifer studied the map with professional interest. "How far are we from any kind of help if something goes wrong? Medical evacuation, I mean." Sarah answered from where she was checking fuel levels. "By float plane, I can have you back to Kodiak in under an hour in good weather. There's also a Coast Guard station on Kodiak that can do emergency medical evacuations if needed, but in bad weather." She shrugged. "Could be a couple days before anyone can get in or out." Ryan, who'd been unusually quiet during the technical discussion, finally spoke up. "How many elk are we likely to see? I mean, what are our actual chances of success?" Tom smiled. "This time of year, in that area, I'd say we've got a 90% chance that everyone who wants to fill a tag will get an opportunity. Roosevelt elk are big animals. Bulls can go 600 to 800 pounds, and they're not as spooky as some game. The challenge is getting close enough for a good shot in heavy cover." Bear Harrison hefted his .300 Winchester Magnum rifle, a custom-built weapon with a loopholed scope that had cost him more than most people's cars. "What's the longest shot we might need to make?" In that timber, probably not more than 150 yards, Tom said. Most shots will be under 100. It's not like hunting open country where you're shooting across canyons. This is thick stuff. You'll need to be ready to shoot quick when you get a chance. Alex checked his GPS unit and backup compass. What about navigation? I don't want to get separated from the group. We stay together, Tom said firmly. Period. Nobody wanders off alone, not even to take a leak. The timber's thick enough that you can lose sight of the group in 50 yards, and the weather can change fast. We hunt as a team, move as a team, and camp as a team. Mark nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Safety first, hunting second. As they finished loading the de Havilland Beaver floatplane, Tom ran through their gear checklist one final time. Each hunter carried a primary rifle, hunting knives, GPS units, emergency beacons, rain gear, and personal camping equipment. The group gear included a large tent for meals and socializing, cooking equipment, first aid supplies, emergency communications equipment, and Tom's defense weapons. Remember, Tom said as they climbed into the plane, this isn't a shooting preserve or a guaranteed hunt. We're going into true wilderness where the animals live by their own rules. Respect the environment, respect the animals, and respect each other, and we'll have a great time. Sarah fired up the Beaver's Pratt and Whitney R985 radial engine, the throaty rumble echoing across the harbor as she checked her instruments. Everyone buckled in. The ride out shouldn't be too bumpy, but Alaska weather can change fast. As the plane lifted off from Kodiak's protected harbor and banked northwest toward Afognak Island, Mark felt his excitement building to an almost unbearable level. Through the plane's windows, the landscape below was breathtaking. Endless forests of Sitka, spruce, and hemlock, crystal-clear streams, and mountains that rose directly from the sea. This was the Alaska he'd dreamed about since boyhood, wild and untamed and dangerous. Ryan pressed his face to the window like a kid on his first airplane ride. Look at that country. No roads, no buildings, no people, just wilderness. Jennifer, ever practical, was reviewing her emergency medical protocols on her tablet. Tom, what's the wildlife situation beyond bears? Anything else we need to worry about? Not really, Tom replied. Maybe some wolves, but they'll avoid us. Lots of eagles, ravens, some smaller predators. The bears are really the only danger, and even they usually want nothing to do with humans. It's just that when things go wrong with bears, they go wrong fast and hard. Alex was already taking photos through the plane's windows, the rugged coastline of Afognak Island coming into view ahead of them. This is incredible. I can't believe places like this still exist. Bear Harrison was cleaning his rifle for the third time that morning, a nervous habit from his military days. 20 years I've been hunting Alaska, and it still gets my blood pumping. There's something about going head-to-head with animals that can kill you that makes you feel alive. Tom glanced back at his clients, mentally categorizing each one. Mark was the planner, probably reliable, but might overthink things in a crisis. Ryan was young and strong, but possibly overconfident. Jennifer had medical training, which was always good to have in the wilderness. Bear had experience, but maybe too much bravado. Alex was the unknown quantity. Young, inexperienced, and carrying expensive equipment that might distract him from safety. Tom, Sarah called from the pilot's seat. I'm seeing some weather building to the west. Not immediate, but we might want to keep an eye on it. Tom studied the horizon where dark clouds were beginning to gather over the open ocean. What's your read on timing? Hard to say. Could hit tomorrow afternoon, could hold off until day 4 like the forecast says. But if it comes early, it's going to be a big one. Mark made a note in his journal. Should we consider cutting the trip short if weather becomes a factor? Let's see how it develops, Tom said. We've got good shelter and weather moves fast out here. Could blow through in 12 hours or could sit for 3 days. That's Alaska for you. As the plane began its descent toward their landing site on a protected cove along Afognac's northeast coast, everyone grew quiet, absorbed in the magnitude of the wilderness below them. The forest stretched unbroken to the horizon, broken only by streams and occasional meadows. There were no signs of human presence, no roads, no power lines, no buildings. They were about to enter one of the last truly wild places in North America. "There's our landing spot," Sarah announced, pointing to a sheltered cove where calm water reflected the surrounding forest. "And there's your hike to base camp." She indicated a faint game trail that led inland from the beach. Tom unbuckled his seatbelt as the plane settled onto the water. "All right, people, from this moment on, we're in bear country. Everyone stays alert, everyone stays together, and nobody does anything stupid. These next 4 days are going to be the adventure of a lifetime if we do it right." The plane's hull scraped against the rocky beach as Sarah maneuvered them into position for unloading. Mark could smell the difference immediately. Clean, cold air tinged with the scent of spruce and seaweed, utterly unlike the urban air of Denver. This was the smell of wilderness, of places where humans were visitors rather than inhabitants. "Ryan, you okay?" Mark asked his brother, who'd grown unusually pale during the descent. "Yeah, this is really it, isn't it? We're really in the middle of nowhere." Jennifer shouldered her pack and picked up her rifle case. "That's the point, right? To get away from civilization and test ourselves against the wild?" Bear Harrison was already on the beach, studying the tree line with the alertness of someone who'd spent decades in dangerous places. "Tom, what's our standard procedure for bear encounters? I know the theory, but what's your specific protocol?" Tom began unloading gear from the plane, his movements economical and practiced. "If we see a bear at distance, we stop, group up, and slowly back away while making noise. If a bear approaches us, we stand our ground, make ourselves big and use bear spray if it gets within 30 feet. If a bear charges, we stand our ground until the last possible second. Most charges are bluffs, but if it makes contact," he patted his rifle, "then it's a fight for survival." Alex was setting up his tripod to photograph their arrival when Tom stopped him. "Put the camera away for now. While we're moving through the forest, you need to focus on your surroundings, not your shots." "But this lighting is perfect for—" "The lighting will be perfect when you're dead too," Tom said bluntly. "Camera work comes after we're safely in camp." Mark consulted his GPS and confirmed their position. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be. 2.3 miles to base camp, elevation gain of about 400 feet. Should take us roughly an hour and a half with full packs." Sarah finished securing the plane to a makeshift anchor. "I'll be back to pick you up on September 29th at 2 p.m., unless I hear otherwise on the radio. Emergency frequency is 121.5 if you need help before then." Tom shouldered his massive pack and adjusted the rifle sling across his chest. "Everyone got their bear spray accessible? Not buried in your pack, but right where you can grab it?" Each hunter confirmed their bear spray was clipped to their belt or chest harness. Tom had insisted on Counter-Assault brand, the most powerful bear deterrent available, effective up to 30 feet in calm conditions. "Ryan, you're looking nervous," Bear observed. "This your first time in serious bear country?" Ryan adjusted his pack straps and tried to project confidence. "I've hunted Colorado, Wyoming, even Montana, but nothing like this." "The key is staying calm," Jennifer said. "Bears can sense fear and anxiety. They're incredibly intelligent animals with senses that make ours look primitive." Tom started up the trail, setting a steady but cautious pace. "Single file, 10 feet between each person. I'll take point. Mark, you're behind me. Then Ryan, Jennifer, Alex, and Bear brings up the rear. If anyone sees anything, and I mean anything, that looks like bear sign, speak up immediately." The trail wound through dense forest of massive Sitka spruce and western hemlock, some trees easily 6 feet in diameter and reaching heights of over 200 feet. The understory was thick with devil's club, salmonberry and elderberry bushes, creating natural corridors where visibility was limited to 20 or 30 yards in any direction. "Look at the size of these trees," Alex whispered, forgetting Tom's instructions about staying quiet. "Some of these have got to be hundreds of years old." "Shh," Tom hissed. "Sound carries in the forest. We don't want to advertise our presence." Mark was studying the ground as they walked, noting the soft earth that would hold tracks well. "Tom, is this typical bear habitat?" "This is perfect bear habitat," Tom replied quietly. "Good cover, water sources, plenty of food. The berry bushes we're walking past are like candy to bears this time of year." After 20 minutes of hiking, Tom stopped abruptly and held up his hand. Everyone froze. Ahead of them, clearly visible in the soft earth of the trail, was a massive paw print. "Fresh bear track," Tom whispered. "Big one. Male, probably 800 pounds or more based on the size. This track isn't more than a few hours old." Mark felt his heart rate spike as he stared at the track. It was enormous, nearly as long as his size 10 boot and twice as wide. The claw marks extended 4 inches beyond the pad. "How can you tell it's fresh?" Ryan asked, his voice barely audible. "See how sharp the edges are. If it was old, they'd be rounded off. And look here." Tom pointed to where the track crossed a small depression. The mud squeezed up between his toes is still dark and moist. Jennifer knelt down to examine the track more closely. "Jesus, I've seen plenty of bear injuries in the ER, but seeing the actual size of the paw that creates those wounds." Bear Harrison checked his rifle, ensuring a round was chambered. Which direction was it heading? Tom studied the tracks leading away from their position. "Looks like it was heading northeast, same general direction we're going, but that doesn't mean much. Bears wander all over their territory." Alex pulled out his camera. "Can I get a quick shot of the track?" "For scale." "Make it fast," Tom said, "and no flash. We don't want to create any more disturbance than necessary." As Alex photographed the massive paw print with his boot beside it for scale, Mark realized that his careful planning and preparation meant nothing against an animal capable of leaving tracks like that. This wasn't a deer or elk they were sharing the woods with. This was a predator that could kill any of them with a single swipe of its paw. "All right, let's keep moving," Tom said, "but everyone stays extra alert. When we see fresh sign like this, it means bears are active in the immediate area." They continued up the trail, the forest growing denser and more primeval with each step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of water running over rocks and the occasional bird call. Mark found himself jumping at every small sound, a branch creaking in the wind, a squirrel chattering in the canopy above, the rustle of something moving through the underbrush. "There," Tom said quietly, pointing to a large Sitka spruce about 50 yards ahead. "Bear rub tree. See the marks on the bark?" The tree showed clear evidence of a large animal rubbing against it, with bark scraped away at a height of nearly 8 feet. Coarse brown hair was caught in the rough bark. "They mark their territory this way," Tom explained, scent marking and showing other bears how big they are. "The higher the marks, the bigger the bear." Ryan stared at the claw marks scored deep into the wood. "How recently?" "Could be yesterday, could be last week. But combined with the fresh track, I'd say we've got an active bear in this immediate area." Jennifer was doing mental calculations. If the claw marks are at 8 feet and bears rear up to mark as high as they can reach, we're talking about a bear that stands 10 to 12 feet tall on its hind legs. "At least," Tom agreed grimly. They reached their base camp location after another hour of hiking, a small clearing beside a clear-running stream where previous hunting parties had established a fire ring and cleared tent sites. The location offered good visibility in all directions while being sheltered from prevailing winds. "Perfect," Mark said, consulting his GPS. "Exactly where it should be, and the description matches what you told us." Tom immediately began establishing their bear-safe camp protocols. Tents go here, in a tight cluster. Cooking area is 50 yards downwind. Food storage is another 50 yards away in bear canisters, hung 12 feet high and 6 feet from any tree trunk. All toiletries, soap, toothpaste, anything with a scent goes with the food. Bear Harrison was studying the surrounding forest with experienced eyes. "Good fields of fire if we need them. Clear lines of sight to all approaches." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Jennifer said, as she began setting up her tent. Alex started unpacking his camera equipment. "Tom, is it safe to do some photography around camp?" "Within the immediate clearing, yes, but don't go wandering into the forest alone. And if you're taking pictures, someone else needs to be watching for bears." As they established camp, Tom continued his safety briefing. "Tonight we'll take turns on watch. 2-hour shifts, 2 people per shift. The person on watch stays awake and alert, scanning for any signs of bears approaching camp. Bear spray and rifle within reach at all times." Mark was impressed by Tom's thoroughness. What are the chances a bear would actually come into camp? "Small, but not zero. Food smells can attract them, but more likely they're just passing through their territory and stumble across us. The important thing is early detection and proper response." Ryan finished setting up his tent and joined the group around the fire ring. "So what's the plan for tomorrow?" Tom spread out his topographical map. "We'll start before dawn, move to this ridge system about a mile north of here. Good elk country, and we can glass several meadows from up there. If we don't see anything by mid-morning, we'll move to these creek bottoms and do some still hunting." Jennifer reviewed her medical kit one more time. "Tom, what's your evacuation plan if someone gets seriously injured?" "Satellite phone to call for help. Then we either move the injured person to the beach for pickup or wait for helicopter evacuation depending on the injury and weather conditions. Worst case, it's a 24 to 48-hour wait for help." As evening approached, they prepared their first meal together. Freeze-dried dinners heated over a small camp stove. Tom had insisted on minimal cooking to reduce food odors that might attract bears. "This is incredible," Alex said, photographing the sunset through the forest canopy. "The light filtering through those trees is amazing." Bear Harrison cleaned his rifle again, a ritual that seemed to calm his nerves. 20 years hunting Alaska, and I still get butterflies the night before the hunt starts." "Good," Tom said. "Complacency kills people in the wilderness. A little nervousness keeps you sharp." Mark reviewed his hunting strategy one more time. "Tom, walk me through what happens if we encounter elk tomorrow. What's the procedure?" "Slow, quiet approach. Hand signals for communication. When someone has a shot opportunity, they take it. Clean, ethical shots only. These animals are too magnificent to wound and lose." Ryan checked his rifle scope one final time. "What about multiple elk? Do we all shoot at once?" "One at a time," Tom said firmly. "I'll designate who shoots first based on position and shot opportunity. We don't want wounded animals running in all directions." As full darkness fell, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were 20 miles from the nearest human being, in the heart of some of the most dangerous wildlife habitat in North America. The forest around them was alive with sounds, branches creaking, animals moving through the underbrush, the distant howl of wolves. "First watch is Jennifer and Bear, midnight to 2 a.m., Tom announced. "Ryan and Alex take 2 to 4. Mark and I have 4 to 6. Everyone else gets sleep, but keep your bear spray right next to your sleeping bag." Jennifer and Bear positioned themselves near the camp's perimeter with clear views of all approaches. "You know," Jennifer said quietly, "in 15 years of emergency medicine, I've treated maybe a dozen serious bear maulings. They're not pretty, What kind of injuries are we talking about? Bear asked. Massive trauma. Bears have enough power to crush skulls, break bones, tear limbs off. Their teeth are designed to puncture and hold, their claws to tear and shred. Most victims who survive have life-changing injuries. Bear adjusted his grip on his rifle. Yeah, well, I've got 200-grain bullets that say this bear's going to have life-changing injuries too if it messes with us. In his tent, Mark lay awake, listening to the sounds of the Alaskan wilderness. Every noise made him tense. Was that just wind in the trees or something large moving through the forest? His brother Ryan was snoring softly in the tent next to him, apparently unbothered by their situation. Alex was also awake, reviewing the photos he'd taken during their hike. The massive bear track looked even more intimidating on his camera's LCD screen. He'd photographed wildlife around the world, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer scale of Alaska's apex predators. Tom dozed fitfully, 30 years of guiding experience having taught him to sleep with one ear open in bear country. His subconscious mind processed every sound, filtering out normal forest noises while staying alert for anything that might indicate danger. At 1:30 a.m., Jennifer thought she heard something moving in the forest beyond their camp perimeter. "Bear," she whispered. "Did you hear that?" Bear had heard it too, a soft rustling sound, too large to be a squirrel or small animal. They both trained their flashlights toward the sound, but saw nothing except dense forest. "Could have been a deer," Bear said quietly. "Or an elk." "Or a bear," Jennifer replied. They sat in tense silence for another 10 minutes, but the sound wasn't repeated. Whatever had been moving through the forest had apparently continued on its way. The rest of the night passed without incident, and at dawn, Tom began rousing the camp. "Time to hunt, people, coffee, quick breakfast, and we're moving out in 30 minutes. September 26th dawned clear and cold, with frost covering their tents and a light mist rising from the stream beside their camp. The temperature was in the low 30s, perfect hunting weather. "Everyone slept okay?" Tom asked as they prepared breakfast. "I heard something moving around in the woods around 1:30, Jennifer reported. "Could have been anything, but it sounded large." Tom nodded. "That's normal. Lots of animals move at night. The important thing is it didn't come into camp." Mark checked his GPS and confirmed their position before shouldering his rifle. "Which direction are we heading first?" Tom pointed northeast toward a ridge visible through the trees. "Up there, about an hour's hike, but we should be in position to glass for elk by first light." The morning hunt proved successful in terms of seeing wildlife, though they didn't encounter any elk. They spotted several Sitka black-tailed deer, a red fox, and numerous birds. More importantly, they found extensive elk sign, tracks, droppings, rubs on trees and well-used trails. "Fresh elk tracks," Tom said, kneeling beside a muddy creek crossing, "probably from yesterday evening or early this morning." Alex got permission to photograph the elk tracks and sign. "The tracks are huge. How much do these Roosevelt elk weigh?" "Mature bulls can go 800 pounds or more," Tom explained. "They're the largest subspecies of elk in North America." Ryan examined a tree where an elk had rubbed its antlers, scraping away bark and leaving deep gouges in the wood. "When do they start rutting?" "Any day now. Once the rut kicks in, the bulls get aggressive and vocal. Makes them easier to locate but more dangerous to approach." Bear Harrison found a wallow where elk had been rolling in mud. "This is fresh too. We're definitely in the right area." By mid-morning, they'd covered several miles of elk habitat, but hadn't made contact with any animals. Tom decided to try a different strategy. "Let's head back toward camp and hunt those creek bottoms we looked at yesterday on the map. Different type of habitat, and elk use those corridors to move between feeding and bedding areas." The creek bottom hunting proved more challenging, with thick vegetation and limited visibility. They moved slowly and quietly, stopping frequently to listen and scan for movement. There, Tom whispered, pointing across a small clearing. Elk. 300 yards away, a small group of elk, 2 cows and a yearling, grazed peacefully in a meadow. Through his binoculars, Mark could see them clearly, their massive bodies dark against the green grass. "No bull," Tom observed, "and they're too far for a good shot in this cover. Let's see if we can get closer." They spent the next hour trying to close the distance, but the elk winded them and disappeared into the forest before they could get within shooting range. "That's hunting," Tom said philosophically. "Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn." They returned to camp for lunch and an afternoon rest, planning to hunt again in the evening when elk would be more active. "How was everyone's first morning?" Tom asked as they prepared sandwiches. "Incredible," Alex said. "I got some great shots of the elk even at that distance." Mark was studying his topographical map. "I want to understand the terrain better. Tomorrow I'd like to try hunting this area to the south." "Good idea," Tom agreed. "Different habitat, different approach routes. We'll check it out." The afternoon rest gave everyone a chance to relax and process their first real taste of Alaska hunting. The forest was spectacular, the wildlife abundant, and the sense of adventure was everything they'd hoped for. "Tom," Jennifer asked, "in all your years guiding, what's the most dangerous situation you've encountered?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Probably a brown bear encounter about 5 years ago. Had a sow with cubs stumble into our camp at night. Ended up having to fire warning shots to drive her off." "What would have happened if the warning shots hadn't worked?" Ryan asked. "Then it would have been a fight for survival," Tom said simply. "When you're dealing with a protective mother bear, there's no backing down. It's kill or be killed." Bear Harrison looked up from cleaning his rifle. "Have you ever had to kill a bear?" "Once. A big male that had been conditioned to human food and was becoming aggressive around camps. Fish and Wildlife asked me to guide the biologist who had to put it down. Not something I enjoyed, but sometimes it's necessary." As evening approached, they prepared for their second hunt. Tom decided to try a different area, closer to camp, but in habitat they hadn't explored yet. "We'll hunt until dark," Tom said. "This time of year, elk are most active in the last hour of daylight." They moved out from camp at 5 p.m., heading toward a series of meadows connected by elk trails. The afternoon light filtering through the forest canopy was magical, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere among the massive trees. "God, this place is beautiful," Alex whispered, resisting the urge to stop for photographs. They'd been hunting for about an hour when Tom suddenly stopped and held up his hand. In the distance, they could hear a sound that made everyone's pulse quicken, the high-pitched bugle of a bull elk. "That's what we came for," Ryan said excitedly. Tom smiled. "Rut's starting early this year. That's a mature bull, probably has cows with him." They spent the next 2 hours trying to locate the bugling bull, but the sound seemed to come from different directions as the elk moved through the forest. Several times they thought they were getting close, only to have the bugling stop completely. "He's got our number," Tom said, as full darkness approached. "Probably winded us or heard something he didn't like." They returned to camp, disappointed but not discouraged. The knowledge that a mature bull was in the area made everyone optimistic about the next day's hunting. "Tomorrow we'll get an earlier start," Tom said. "Try to intercept him at first light when he's moving back to his bedding area." The second night passed peacefully, with Bear and Alex taking the first watch, followed by Jennifer and Ryan, and finally Mark and Tom. Everyone was getting accustomed to the rhythms of wilderness camping and the constant awareness required in bear country. September 27th dawned foggy and cool, with visibility limited to 50 yards in the dense mist. Tom decided to wait for the fog to lift before beginning their hunt. "In this visibility, we could walk right into a bear or elk and not see it until we're on top of it," he explained. "Better to wait for better conditions." By 8 a.m., the fog had lifted enough to begin hunting. Tom led them toward the area where they'd heard the bugling elk the evening before, hoping to pick up fresh tracks in the damp earth. "There," Mark said, pointing to clear elk tracks in the mud beside a small stream. "Fresh from this morning." The tracks led them through increasingly thick forest, winding along game trails that had been used by generations of elk. The going was slow and difficult, with frequent stops to navigate around fallen trees and dense vegetation. "Big bull," Tom observed, studying the tracks. "Look at the size of those prints and the length of his stride. This is a mature animal." They followed the tracks for over a mile, climbing steadily toward a ridge where Tom suspected the elk might be bedded down for the day. The forest grew more open as they gained elevation, offering better visibility but less cover for stalking. "We need to be extra quiet now," Tom whispered. "If he's bedded up here, he'll be watching his back trail." They were moving carefully through a grove of large spruce trees when Alex spotted movement ahead. "There," he breathed, pointing through the trees. 200 yards away, partially hidden by forest, they could see the massive form of a bull elk. Even at distance, his size was impressive, easily 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with antlers that would score well over 300 inches. "Jesus," Ryan whispered, "look at the size of him." Tom studied the elk through his binoculars. "He's bedded down, but alert. We need to get closer for a good shot." They spent the next 30 minutes trying to close the distance, using every scrap of cover and moving with infinite patience. When they were finally within 100 yards, Tom signaled for Mark to prepare for a shot. "Can you see him clearly?" Tom whispered. Mark peered through his rifle scope. "Yes, but he's partially behind that tree. I need him to stand up or move into the clear." They waited motionlessly for another 10 minutes, hoping the elk would present a clear shot opportunity. Finally, something spooked the animal, perhaps their scent carried by a shifting breeze, and he stood up, presenting his massive profile. "Take him," Tom breathed. Mark's rifle cracked, the sound echoing through the forest like thunder. The bull elk staggered, then regained his footing and crashed away through the timber. "Hit," Tom said. "But he's still moving. Let's give him a few minutes, then track him." They waited 15 minutes before taking up the blood trail. The drops of bright red blood on the forest floor told a clear story. The elk was wounded, but not fatally. "Lung shot," Tom determined. "Good hit, but he's big and tough. Could take a while for him to go down." They followed the blood trail for half a mile through increasingly difficult terrain. The wounded elk was heading downhill toward thick cover near the creek bottom where they'd hunted the day before. "Blood's getting thinner," Bear observed. "Either he's slowing down or the wound's clotting." Tom nodded grimly. "These big bulls are incredibly tough. I've seen them go miles with what should be fatal wounds." The blood trail led them into some of the thickest cover they'd encountered, where visibility was limited to 10 or 15 yards. They moved slowly and carefully, knowing that a wounded elk could be dangerous if cornered. "There," Jennifer said quietly, pointing ahead. The massive bull lay on his side in a small clearing, clearly dead. Mark's shot had been true. The bullet had taken out both lungs, but the elk's incredible vitality had allowed him to travel nearly a mile before succumbing. "Congratulations," Tom said, shaking Mark's hand. "That's a magnificent animal." The elk was even larger up close than he'd appeared through the rifle scope. His antlers stretched 6 feet from tip to tip, and his body weight was clearly over 700 pounds. "My God," Alex said, photographing the elk from every angle. "I've never seen anything like this." Ryan was examining the elk's massive antlers. "This has got to be one of the biggest Roosevelt elk ever taken." Tom began the process of field dressing the elk, a job that would take several hours given the animal's size. "We'll need to quarter him here and pack him out in pieces. Too big to move whole." As they worked to process Mark's elk, none of them noticed the large brown shape watching them from the dense forest 100 yards away. The sound of Mark's rifle shot had attracted attention they didn't want from an animal they couldn't see. The grizzly bear that had left the massive track on their first day was curious about the commotion in his territory. The smell of fresh blood and the activity around the dead elk triggered his predatory instincts. In his 8-year-old brain, these strange creatures had just provided him with an easy meal. He began moving closer, using the thick vegetation for cover, his massive paws making no sound on the soft forest floor. At 900 pounds and standing 4.5 feet tall at the shoulder, he was the apex predator of Afognak Island, afraid of nothing and accustomed to taking what he wanted. Tom finished field dressing the elk and began the process of skinning and quartering. This is going to take a while. We'll probably need to make several trips to get all the meat back to camp. How long do we have before the meat spoils? Mark asked. In this weather, we're fine for 24 hours if we keep it cool and covered. After that, we need to get it to a freezer or start jerking it. Bear Harrison had positioned himself as a lookout while the others worked on the elk. His military training had taught him to always maintain security, even during routine tasks. Tom, how often do bears try to steal kills from hunters? More often than you'd think, Tom replied, without looking up from his work. Fresh meat is easier than hunting for themselves. That's why we need to stay alert. As if summoned by their conversation, a stick snapped in the forest behind them. Everyone froze. What was that? Ryan asked. Tom's head came up sharply. Everyone stop what you're doing and look around. Slowly. They scanned the forest in all directions, but saw nothing except dense vegetation and shadows. Could have been a branch falling, Jennifer suggested. Could have been, Tom agreed. But let's assume it wasn't. Everyone stay close together and keep your eyes open. They returned to processing the elk, but now everyone was tense and alert. Alex found himself jumping at every small sound, and Ryan kept glancing over his shoulder toward the dark forest. Tom, Mark said quietly, maybe we should focus on getting 1/4 back to camp and come back for the rest tomorrow. Good idea. Let's take the hindquarter. It's the best meat anyway. As Tom wrapped the hindquarter in game bags, another sound came from the forest, this time a low grunt that was definitely not a falling branch. Bear, Tom said simply, reaching for his rifle. Everyone grabbed their weapons and formed a tight group around the elk carcass. Tom scanned the forest with his binoculars, looking for movement or any sign of the animal they knew was watching them. There, Alex whispered, pointing toward a wall of thick vegetation 50 yards away. Through his binoculars, Tom could make out a patch of brown fur moving slowly through the brush. It's a big one. He's checking us out, trying to decide if he wants to challenge us for the elk. What do we do? Ryan asked, his voice tight with stress. We stand our ground and make ourselves known. Sometimes they'll back off if they realize we're humans. Tom called out in a loud, firm voice, "Hey, Bear, get out of here! Go on, get!" The movement in the brush stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then they heard a sound that made everyone's blood run cold, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "He's not backing down," Tom said grimly. "Everyone stay together. If he shows himself, hit him with bear spray. If he charges, shoot to kill." Jennifer's medical training kicked in as her adrenaline spiked. "Tom, what's our fallback position if this goes bad?" "We stick together and fight. Running will just trigger his chase instinct." The bear emerged from the thick brush like a nightmare made flesh. At 900 pounds, he was massive beyond comprehension, his brown fur rippling over muscles that could crush a man's skull with casual ease. His small eyes fixed on the group of humans standing around his potential meal. "Jesus Christ," Bear breathed. "Look at the size of that thing." The bear reared up on his hind legs, standing nearly 10 feet tall, and let out a roar that echoed through the forest like thunder. Saliva dripped from jaws, equipped with teeth designed to tear and kill. "Nobody move," Tom commanded. "He's trying to intimidate us. Stand your ground." The bear dropped back to all fours and began moving toward them in a slow, deliberate walk. His massive head swayed from side to side as he assessed the threat they represented. 40 yards, Tom said. If he gets to 30, we spray him. Mark had his rifle trained on the bear's chest, his hands surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through his system. Tom, are you sure the bear spray will stop something that big? It better, Tom replied. The bear continued his approach, each step bringing his massive bulk closer to their position. At 35 yards, he stopped and stood up again, testing the air with his sensitive nose. Now, Tom said. All 5 hunters deployed their bear spray simultaneously, creating a wall of orange mist between them and the bear. The powerful capsaicin spray hit the animal in the face, and he immediately began backing away, shaking his head and snorting. It's working, Alex said. He's leaving. But instead of retreating into the forest, the bear circled around their position, staying just outside the effective range of their bear spray. He was clearly reluctant to give up the elk carcass. He's not done with us, Tom said. Bears are incredibly intelligent. He's looking for another approach. They stood in tense silence for several minutes, watching the bear move through the forest around them. Occasionally, they caught glimpses of brown fur through the trees, but the animal seemed to have backed off. Maybe he's gone, Ryan suggested hopefully. Don't count on it, Tom replied. Bears are patient. He could wait us out for hours. Mark made a decision. Let's take what meat we can carry and get out of here. We can come back tomorrow with more people if he's moved on. Tom nodded. Good call. Everyone grab what you can and we'll move out in formation. Stay close together. They loaded up with as much elk meat as they could carry and began moving back toward camp. Tom took point with his rifle ready, while Bear brought up the rear, constantly checking behind them for any sign of pursuit. The hike back to camp took twice as long as usual, with frequent stops to listen and scan for the bear. Everyone was exhausted from the constant adrenaline and tension by the time they reached their base camp. "Is he following us?" Jennifer asked as they entered the camp perimeter. Tom studied their back trail with binoculars. "I don't see anything, but that doesn't mean he's not there. Bears can move through the forest like ghosts when they want to." They secured the elk meat in their bear-proof containers and established a defensive perimeter around camp. Everyone was rattled by the encounter, and the reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. "That was a big bear," Bear said, checking his rifle for the 10th time in an hour. "Biggest I've seen in 30 years of guiding," Tom confirmed, "and he wasn't afraid of us. That's not a good sign." Alex reviewed the few photos he'd managed to take during the encounter. "I got a couple shots of him standing up. Look at this." The images showed the massive bear in all his terrifying glory. 900 pounds of muscle and fury, with claws as long as knives and jaws capable of crushing bones. "Send those to me when we get back to civilization," Jennifer said. "Nobody's going to believe how big that thing was without photographic evidence." As evening approached, Tom made the decision to establish a more defensive camp setup. "We're going to maintain a watch all night. 3 people awake at all times, positioned around the camp perimeter." "You think he'll come back?" Mark asked. "Bears are creatures of habit. If he considers this his territory, and he clearly does, then yeah, he might come back, especially if he remembers where we got that elk." They prepared dinner over their small camp stove, trying to minimize food odors that might attract unwanted attention. Everyone was jumpy, and the normal camp routine was replaced by constant vigilance. "Tom," Ryan said as they ate, "what are our options for getting out of here early if this bear becomes a bigger problem?" "We've got the satellite phone. I can call Sarah and have her pick us up tomorrow if necessary. But I hate to cut the trip short because of one bear encounter." Bear Harrison was studying the forest around their camp with military precision. "That bear knows where we are now. He's got our scent, knows our numbers, and he's not afraid. That's a dangerous combination." "What would happen if he actually attacked someone?" Alex asked. Jennifer answered from her medical perspective. Bear attacks are catastrophic trauma events. We're talking about crushed skulls, severed arteries, massive tissue damage. Even if we could stop the bleeding and stabilize someone, getting them to a hospital in time would be nearly impossible. The sobering reality of their situation settled over the camp like a heavy blanket. They were 20 miles from help, in the territory of a massive predator that had already shown aggression toward them. "Look," Tom said, "I don't want to panic anyone." We handled that encounter correctly, and bears usually don't pursue conflicts with humans, but we need to stay alert and be prepared. As darkness fell, they organized their watch schedule. Tom, Bear, and Mark would take the first shift from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. Jennifer, Ryan, and Alex would cover 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. "Remember," Tom said, "you're watching for movement, listening for sounds that don't belong, and most importantly, trusting your instincts. If something feels wrong, wake everyone up." The first half of the night passed without incident. The forest was alive with normal sounds. Owls calling, small animals moving through the underbrush, the distant howl of wolves, but nothing that suggested the presence of their large, unwelcome neighbor. At 2 a.m., the watch changed. Jennifer, Ryan, and Alex positioned themselves around the camp perimeter with night vision scopes and bear spray within easy reach. "This is surreal," Alex whispered. "Yesterday I was worried about getting good photographs. Tonight I'm watching for a 900-pound killer." Ryan was studying the forest with a thermal scope borrowed from Bear's equipment. "I can see heat signatures from small animals, but nothing big enough to be our bear." Jennifer maintained a professional calm despite the circumstances. "The important thing is early detection. If that bear approaches camp, we need to know while he's still at distance." At 4:30 a.m., Ryan's thermal scope picked up something that made his heart race. "Guys, I've got a large heat signature about 100 yards north of camp. It's big, and it's moving this way." Jennifer and Alex immediately focused their attention in that direction, while Ryan continued tracking the thermal signature. "It's definitely moving toward us," Ryan reported. "And it's huge, much bigger than any deer or elk would be." "Wake everyone up," Jennifer ordered, quietly. Within minutes, all 6 members of their party were awake and armed, watching the northern approach to their camp through various scopes and night vision devices. "There," Tom said, spotting movement through his binoculars. "About 70 yards out, it's him." The massive brown bear was moving through the forest with surprising stealth for such a large animal. In the dim starlight, he was barely visible except when he passed between trees. "What's he doing?" Mark asked. "Testing us," Tom replied, "seeing how alert we are, whether we're a threat or just easy prey." The bear approached to within 50 yards of their camp before stopping. He stood motionless for several minutes, apparently evaluating the situation. "He can see our camp layout," Tom observed. "Bears have excellent night vision. He knows exactly where we are." Without warning, the bear reared up on his hind legs and let out a roar that seemed to shake the forest. Even at 50 yards, the sound was terrifying, a deep, guttural challenge that announced his dominance over this territory. "Everyone stay calm," Tom commanded. "Don't run. Don't make sudden movements. We're going to stand our ground." The bear dropped back to all fours and began a slow, deliberate approach toward their camp. Each step brought nearly half a ton of predator closer to their position. 30 yards, Bear called out. "Get ready with the bear spray," Tom ordered. "If he gets to 20 yards, we deploy everything we've got." The bear stopped at exactly 30 yards and stood up again. In the dim light, his massive form looked like something from a nightmare, 10 feet of muscle, claws, and teeth designed by evolution to kill. "He's testing our resolve," Tom said quietly, "seeing if we'll break and run." For 10 minutes that felt like hours. The standoff continued. The bear would drop to all fours, move a few steps closer, then rear up and roar. Each time the humans held their ground, weapons ready but not yet engaged. "This is psychological warfare," Jennifer observed. "He's trying to intimidate us into abandoning camp." Finally, whether satisfied with his intimidation display or simply bored with the game, the bear dropped to all fours one last time and melted back into the forest. Within minutes he was gone, as if he'd never been there. "Jesus," Alex breathed. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced." Tom lowered his rifle, but didn't relax his vigilance. "He'll be back. Bears don't give up territory easily, and we're definitely in his territory." The rest of the night passed without further incident, but nobody got any sleep. By dawn, everyone was exhausted from the constant adrenaline and stress of the encounter. "All right," Tom said as they prepared breakfast. "We need to make a decision. Do we stay and continue hunting, or do we call for early pickup?" Mark looked around at the faces of his fellow hunters. Everyone showed the strain of the last 12 hours. "What's your professional recommendation, Tom?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. "In 30 years of guiding, I've never had a bear show that level of persistent aggression. Usually they encounter humans once and avoid the area for days or weeks. This one is different." "Different how?" Ryan asked. "He's not afraid of us, and he's not backing down. That makes him extremely dangerous. Bears like that have killed people." Bear Harrison spoke up. "I vote we stay. We didn't come all this way to be scared off by one animal." "That one animal weighs 900 pounds and could kill any of us with a single swipe," Jennifer pointed out. "From a medical perspective, I have serious concerns about continuing." Alex was reviewing his photos from the previous day's encounter. "I've got incredible footage of this bear. Maybe we should cut our losses and get out while we can." Mark felt the weight of leadership as the organizer of the trip. "Tom, if we stay, what precautions can we take to minimize risk?" "We hunt in a tight group, never split up, maintain constant vigilance and establish better defensive positions around camp. But I can't guarantee everyone's safety if that bear decides to press an attack." The satellite phone call to their pilot was made at 8 a.m. Sarah Morrison confirmed she could pick them up that afternoon if they decided to abort the trip. "Weather's still good for flying," Sarah reported, "but there's a big storm system moving in tomorrow that could ground aircraft for several days." The group spent the morning debating their options. The hunting had been excellent. Mark had harvested a magnificent elk, and the experience of Alaskan wilderness was everything they'd dreamed of. But the persistent threat of the aggressive bear cast a shadow over everything. "Let's compromise," Mark finally suggested. "We'll hunt today, but we'll hunt as a group and stay close to camp. If we have another encounter with the bear, we call for immediate pickup." Tom nodded. "That's reasonable, but everyone needs to understand. If that bear shows up again, it's probably going to be a fight. Bears don't usually give humans 3 chances." They spent September 28th hunting in a tight formation within a mile of camp. The constant vigilance required to watch for both elk and bears was exhausting, but they managed to spot several elk and even had a few long-range shot opportunities that they passed up due to the circumstances. Under normal conditions, that would have been an easy shot, Bear said, after they passed up a shot at a bull elk at 200 yards. "These aren't normal conditions," Tom replied. "A wounded elk running through the forest would create exactly the kind of chaos that Bear would exploit." By late afternoon, they'd returned to camp without incident. Everyone was beginning to hope that the bear had moved on to other parts of his territory. "Maybe he got the message," Ryan suggested as they prepared their final dinner. "We stood our ground, showed we weren't easy prey, and he decided to look elsewhere." Tom wasn't convinced. "Bears have long memories, and they're territorial. Just because we haven't seen him doesn't mean he's gone." And, as evening approached on September 28th, Alex was organizing his photography equipment and reviewing the incredible images he'd captured during their 3 days in Alaska. This has been the experience of a lifetime, even with the bear situation. Mark was field stripping the remainder of his elk meat, preparing it for transport back to civilization. I still can't believe the size of that bull. It's going to be the hunting story of a lifetime. Jennifer was checking her medical supplies one final time. I'm glad we managed the trip without any serious injuries. Bear encounters aside, this has been remarkable. Bear Harrison was cleaning his rifle, a ritual that had become even more frequent since their encounters with the massive grizzly. 20 years hunting Alaska, and this has been the most intense experience I've ever had. Ryan was studying their topographical maps, already planning a return trip. Next time, maybe we come in with a larger group, more hunters, better communication equipment. Tom was monitoring their perimeter with binoculars, maintaining the vigilance that had kept them safe for 3 days. Let's focus on getting home safely before we start planning the next adventure. As the sun set on their final night in the Alaskan wilderness, everyone was looking forward to Sarah's pickup the next afternoon. They'd survived 3 days in some of the most dangerous wildlife habitat in North America, harvested a magnificent elk, and experienced the raw beauty of Alaska's wilderness. None of them suspected that their most dangerous encounter was still hours away. The bear had not moved on. Instead, he'd spent the day observing their camp from various positions, learning their routines and weaknesses. His primitive brain had categorized these strange creatures as competitors for his territory, and he'd decided they needed to be eliminated. At 9 p.m. on September 28th, as the hunters settled into their final night watch rotation, the massive grizzly began his approach through the forest. This time, he wasn't coming to intimidate or investigate. This time, he was coming to kill. Tom took the first watch with Bear and Jennifer, positioning themselves around the camp perimeter with night vision equipment and weapons ready. The forest seemed unusually quiet, with none of the normal nighttime sounds they'd grown accustomed to. Something feels different tonight, Jennifer observed. Where are all the usual sounds? Tom had noticed it too. When the forest goes quiet like this, it usually means there's a large predator moving through the area. Other animals sense it and hunker down. Bear was scanning the northern approach with his thermal scope. I'm not seeing anything yet, but my gut tells me we're being watched. In his tent, Mark was reviewing his hunting journal from the trip, documenting the details of his elk harvest and the incredible bear encounters. He'd planned to share these stories for years to come, assuming they all made it home safely. Alex was transferring photos from his camera to backup memory cards, protecting his once-in-a-lifetime images of Alaskan wildlife. The pictures of their aggressive bear encounters would be invaluable for wildlife education and bear safety training. Ryan was trying to sleep, but finding it impossible with the adrenaline still coursing through his system. Every small sound made him tense, expecting to hear Tom's voice calling out a bear warning. At 11:47 p.m., Bear's thermal scope detected a large heat signature approaching from the east, a different direction than their previous encounters. Contact, Bear whispered. Large thermal signature, 200 yards east, and closing. Tom immediately alerted the rest of the camp. Within seconds, all 6 hunters were awake and armed, taking defensive positions around their camp perimeter. Same bear? Mark asked as he chambered around. Has to be, Tom replied. Nothing else that big lives on this island. The bear's approach was different this time. Faster, more direct, with none of the cautious testing behavior they'd observed before. Through night vision scopes, they could see his massive form moving through the forest with deadly purpose. He's not stopping, Tom observed grimly. This isn't intimidation. This is an attack. At 100 yards, The bear broke into a ground-eating lope, his massive paws drumming against the forest floor like thunder. His eyes reflected the starlight like yellow flames as he closed the distance to their camp. "Bear spray ready," Tom commanded. "If he gets within 50 yards, deploy everything." The charge of a 900-pound grizzly bear is one of nature's most terrifying sights. Despite his massive size, the bear covered ground with incredible speed, crashing through the underbrush like a living avalanche. 50 yards, Bear called out. All 6 hunters deployed their bear spray simultaneously, creating a cloud of orange mist between them and the charging bear. But the animal's momentum carried him through the spray, his rage and territorial instincts overriding the burning pain in his eyes and nose. "Rifles!" Tom shouted. The first shot came from Mark's .300 Winchester Magnum, the bullet striking the bear center mass, but barely slowing his charge. Bear Harrison's shot followed a split second later, then Tom's powerful .45-70. The massive grizzly absorbed 3 direct hits and kept coming, his body armor of muscle and fat protecting his vital organs. At 20 yards, he reared up on his hind legs, standing nearly 10 feet tall and roaring his challenge to the humans who had invaded his territory. "Keep shooting!" Tom yelled. More shots rang out. Jennifer's .270, Ryan's .3006, Alex's borrowed rifle. The bear staggered under the impact, but his prehistoric fury drove him forward. At 10 yards, the grizzly dropped to all fours and launched himself at the nearest target, Ryan Cole, who was reloading his rifle when 900 pounds of predator slammed into him like a freight train. The impact drove Ryan to the ground with bone-crushing force. The bear's massive jaws clamped down on his head and shoulder, powerful muscles designed to crush the skulls of caribou and moose. Ryan's screams filled the night air as 4-inch claws raked across his chest and abdomen. "Get him off!" Mark screamed, firing his rifle point-blank into the bear's side. The wounded grizzly released Ryan and turned on Mark with lightning speed. Despite multiple gunshot wounds, the animal's predatory instincts were undiminished. His massive paw caught Mark across the chest, sending him flying 15 feet through the air to crash against a tree. Bear Harrison moved in close with his shotgun loaded with slugs, firing repeatedly into the animal's head and neck. The heavy slugs finally began to have effect, and the massive grizzly staggered and fell, but the damage was already done. Ryan Cole lay motionless in a spreading pool of blood, his head and chest mangled by the bear's crushing jaws and razor-sharp claws. Mark was unconscious against the tree, his chest caved in from the impact of the bear's paw. "Medical kit!" Tom shouted to Jennifer. "Now!" Dr. Jennifer Walsh immediately began triage, her 15 years of emergency medicine training taking over, despite the horror of the situation. One look at Ryan told her everything she needed to know. Massive head trauma, arterial bleeding, injuries incompatible with life. "Ryan's gone," she said quietly, then turned to Mark. "Get me light. I need to see what we're dealing with." Alex held a flashlight while Jennifer examined Mark's injuries. Broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, head trauma from hitting the tree. Critical but potentially survivable if they could get him to a hospital. "Tom, get on that satellite phone," Jennifer ordered. "We need immediate medical evacuation." Tom was already dialing the emergency number, his hands shaking as the reality of the situation hit him. In 30 years of guiding, he'd never lost a client. Now he had 1 dead and 1 dying. "Mayday, mayday, this is hunting party on Afognak Island," Tom spoke into the satellite phone. "We have a fatal bear attack, 1 dead, 1 critical. Need immediate helicopter evacuation." The Coast Guard response was immediate. "Roger, Afognak Island. Confirm 1 fatality, 1 critical injury from bear attack. What's your exact location?" Tom provided their GPS coordinates while Jennifer worked to stabilize Mark. "Patient is unconscious, probable internal injuries, needs immediate trauma center care." "Be advised," the Coast Guard operator replied. "Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. We'll launch as soon as possible. but helicopter operations may be limited. Bear Harrison and Alex had dragged the dead grizzly away from the camp area, the massive animal finally succumbing to the multiple gunshot wounds. Even in death, the bear was terrifying. 900 pounds of muscle, claws and teeth that had turned their hunting trip into a nightmare. "Look at this thing," Alex said, staring at the dead bear. "Even shot full of holes, it kept fighting." "That's what makes them so dangerous," Tom replied grimly. "They don't know when to quit." Jennifer was working frantically to keep Mark alive, using every piece of emergency medical equipment in their kit. "His pulse is thready and weak. We're losing him." For the next 4 hours, they waited in the darkness for help that seemed impossibly far away. Jennifer maintained Mark's airway and monitored his vital signs, while Tom coordinated with rescue services. The storm front that had been building to the west was now affecting flying conditions, grounding most aircraft. "Coast Guard helicopter is attempting approach," the radio crackled at 4:30 a.m., "but weather conditions are marginal. Stand by." They could hear the helicopter's rotors beating through the storm, but thick clouds and high winds made landing impossible. After circling their position for 20 minutes, the pilot was forced to turn back. "Unable to land due to weather," came the devastating news. "We'll attempt again at first light if conditions improve." Mark's condition continued to deteriorate throughout the night. Despite Jennifer's best efforts, his injuries were beyond what field medicine could address. At 6:15 a.m. on September 29th, Mark Cole died in his brother's blood-soaked sleeping bag, 20 miles from the nearest hospital. When the Coast Guard helicopter finally reached their location at noon on September 29th, they found 3 traumatized survivors standing over 2 body bags. The massive dead grizzly lay nearby, testament to the violence that had destroyed their hunting trip. "Jesus," the paramedic said, examining the bear. "I've never seen one this big. Must go 900 pounds. Tom looked older than his 56 years as he helped load the bodies into the helicopter. 30 years I've been guiding in Alaska. Never lost anyone. Now I lose 2 in one night." The flight back to Kodiak took 45 minutes, during which Bear Harrison, Alex Chen and Tom Beaumont sat in stunned silence. The helicopter's medical bay, designed for rescue operations, became a temporary morgue for the Cole brothers. Jennifer Walsh rode in the co-pilot's seat, answering questions from the Coast Guard crew about the attack. The bear absorbed multiple rifle hits before going down. "I've never seen that level of aggression or determination." At Kodiak Regional Hospital, the 3 survivors were treated for shock and minor injuries. Jennifer, as a physician, assisted with the official medical examination of the victims, documenting the massive trauma inflicted by the bear. Cause of death for both victims is massive trauma consistent with large predator attack, the coroner's report would later state. Injuries include crushing skull fractures, arterial lacerations, and extensive tissue damage. Alaska state troopers interviewed each survivor separately, reconstructing the events that led to the double fatality. Investigator Sergeant Mike Reynolds had seen bear attacks before, but never anything this devastating. "Walk me through the whole encounter," Reynolds said to Tom. "From the beginning." Tom recounted the 3 days of escalating encounters with the massive grizzly, the bear's persistent aggression, and the final fatal attack. "We did everything right. Bear spray, standing our ground, shooting when necessary, but this bear was different." "Different how?" Reynolds asked. "Most bears avoid conflict with humans. This one sought it out. He was territorial, aggressive, and completely unafraid. Even multiple gunshot wounds didn't stop him." Bear Harrison's account corroborated Tom's story. "I've hunted Alaska for 20 years. Never seen a bear that aggressive. It was like he was personally offended by our presence." Alex Chen provided the photographic evidence that would later be crucial to the investigation. His images of the massive grizzly, both alive and dead, documented the extraordinary size and aggressive behavior of the animal. These photos show clear evidence of the bear's aggressive posturing, Reynolds noted. Standing upright, direct approach to humans, no fear response to noise or movement. The Alaska Department of Fish and Wildlife launched their own investigation into the attack. Biologist Dr. Sarah Martinez examined the dead bear, collecting tissue samples and studying its physical condition. "This is an exceptional animal," Dr. Martinez reported. Age approximately 8 years, weight 912 pounds, excellent physical condition. No signs of disease or injury that might explain abnormal behavior. The bear's stomach contents revealed a diet consistent with normal foraging behavior: salmon, berries, and vegetation. There was no evidence of previous human food conditioning that might have made him aggressive around people. What we have here is a mature, healthy male brown bear displaying natural territorial behavior, Dr. Martinez concluded. Unfortunately, that behavior intersected with human presence in a tragic way. Media coverage of the attack was extensive, with news outlets across Alaska and the lower 48 covering the story. Massive grizzly kills 2 hunters dominated headlines for days. This tragedy reminds us that Alaska's wilderness is home to some of the world's most dangerous predators, wrote the Anchorage Daily News. Even experienced hunters with proper equipment and training are not immune to the risks. The families of Mark and Ryan Cole arrived in Kodiak on September 30th to claim the bodies and learn the details of their sons' deaths. Mark's wife, Sarah, and Ryan's fiancée, Lisa, were devastated by the loss. "They were so excited about this trip," Sarah Cole told reporters. "Mark had been planning it for 3 years. He never imagined something like this could happen. Tom Beaumont met with the families personally, accepting responsibility for their safety and the failure to protect them. 'I'm sorry,' was all he could say through his tears." The legal ramifications began immediately. The Cole family retained a wrongful death attorney, claiming that Tom had failed in his duty to protect his clients from known dangers. "This guide knew there was an aggressive bear in the area," attorney Robert Chen argued. "He had multiple encounters with the animal and should have evacuated his clients immediately." Tom's defense attorney countered that the group had followed all established safety protocols and that the bear's behavior was beyond prediction or control. "Wild animals are inherently unpredictable," defense attorney Maria Lopez argued. "My client took every reasonable precaution to ensure his client's safety." The civil lawsuit would drag on for 2 years before being settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Tom's guiding business never recovered from the tragedy, and he retired from professional hunting guide work. Dr. Jennifer Walsh returned to her emergency medicine practice in Anchorage, but was haunted by her inability to save Mark Cole's life. Despite having all her medical training and equipment, the wilderness setting made advanced trauma care impossible. "It's frustrating to have the knowledge to save someone, but lack the resources," she told her colleagues. "In a hospital setting, both men might have survived. In the wilderness, there was nothing I could do." Bear Harrison struggled with survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress following the attack. The man who had earned his nickname through physical toughness found himself unable to sleep without nightmares of the massive grizzly's charge. "I keep seeing those yellow eyes in the darkness," he told his counselor. 900 pounds of pure rage coming straight at us. I wake up in a cold sweat every night." Alex Chen's photographs and video footage of the attack became valuable tools for bear safety education programs across Alaska. His images, showing the massive size and aggressive behavior of Kodiak Island grizzlies, were used to train hunters and wildlife biologists. "These images probably saved lives," said bear safety instructor Dave Miller. "People see the actual size and power of these animals and take the threat more seriously." The attack site on Afognak Island was investigated by a team of wildlife biologists who found evidence of the bear's territorial behavior. Claw marks on trees, scat piles, and scent markings indicated that the area was the center of a large male's territory. This was his home, explained Dr. Martinez. From his perspective, these humans were invaders who needed to be driven out or eliminated. The dead grizzly's hide and skull were preserved for scientific study. At 9 feet long and with a skull measuring 28 inches, he was among the largest brown bears ever documented on Afognak Island. This animal represents the apex of brown bear evolution, noted Dr. Martinez. Perfect predator, perfectly adapted to his environment, and unfortunately, perfectly capable of killing humans. 6 months after the attack, Sarah Morrison returned to the site to retrieve personal items left behind during the emergency evacuation. The forest had already begun to reclaim the campsite, with new growth covering the blood-stained ground where the Cole brothers died. It's hard to believe something so violent happened in such a beautiful place, Morrison reflected. Nature doesn't care about our human concepts of fair play or safety. The spot where Mark harvested his elk became a memorial site of sorts, marked by a simple wooden cross carved with both brothers' names. Fellow hunters who knew the story would sometimes visit the site to pay their respects. Alaska Fish and Wildlife increased bear monitoring efforts on Afognak Island following the attack, but found no evidence of unusually aggressive bear behavior. The attack appeared to be an isolated incident involving one particularly territorial male. Brown bears are naturally territorial and can be extremely dangerous, said Fish and Wildlife spokesman John Davis. This attack, while tragic, was not unprecedented. It's a reminder that these animals are wild predators, not park attractions. The hunting outfitter that had arranged the trip through Tom's Guide service faced its own legal challenges and eventually went out of business. The liability insurance claims from the attack bankrupted the small company that had operated successfully for 15 years. 1 year after the attack, a memorial service was held in Denver for Mark and Ryan Cole. Over 200 friends and family members attended, sharing memories of 2 brothers who had died pursuing their passion for hunting and adventure. They died doing what they loved in one of the most beautiful places on earth, said their father, William Cole. I can't say I'm not angry about losing my sons, but I know they wouldn't have wanted to live their lives in fear. The memorial featured a display of Mark's hunting trophies, including the massive Roosevelt elk he harvested just hours before his death. The elk's antlers, scoring 387 Boone and Crockett points, represented one of the finest specimens ever taken from Afognak Island. That elk will be Mark's lasting legacy, said his hunting partner from previous trips. Every time someone sees those antlers, they'll remember a hunter who died at the moment of his greatest triumph. Bear Harrison eventually returned to hunting, but never again in Alaska. The memory of the massive grizzly was too fresh, too terrifying to risk another encounter. I lost my nerve, he admitted to friends. 20 years of fearless hunting, and one bear broke me. I can't get that image out of my head. 900 pounds of death coming straight at us. Alex Chen's photography career was launched by his documentation of the attack. His images appeared in National Geographic, Outside Magazine, and numerous wildlife publications. The tragedy that had cost 2 lives became the foundation of his professional success. I feel guilty about profiting from their deaths, Chen said. But if these photos help other hunters understand the risks and stay safe, then maybe something good came from this nightmare. Dr. Jennifer Walsh became a leading advocate for improved wilderness medical training for hunting guides and outfitters. She developed protocols for handling traumatic injuries in remote locations where evacuation might be delayed. The Cole brothers might have survived if we'd had better emergency medical equipment and training, Walsh argued. Their deaths should motivate improvements in wilderness medicine. The massive grizzly that killed the Cole brothers was eventually mounted and displayed at the Alaska Department of Fish and Wildlife offices in Anchorage. The display includes educational materials about bear safety and the risks of hunting in Alaska's wilderness. This bear represents both the majesty and danger of Alaska's wildlife, explains the display placard. He was a magnificent predator, doing what evolution designed him to do, defending his territory against perceived threats. Tom Beaumont never guided another hunting trip after the Cole brothers' deaths. The 60-year veteran of Alaska's wilderness was broken by his failure to protect his clients, retiring to a small cabin outside Kodiak where he lived as a recluse. "I knew those bears were dangerous," Tom told a reporter years later, "but in 30 years of guiding, I'd never seen one that aggressive. It haunts me every day, wondering if there was something different I could have done." The scientific community studied the attack extensively, trying to understand what made this particular bear so aggressive. DNA analysis, behavioral studies, and habitat assessment all failed to identify any abnormal factors. "Sometimes predators kill humans," concluded Dr. Martinez. "It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's reality. This bear was simply doing what bears do, defending territory and asserting dominance." The attack became a case study in wildlife management programs across North America. The detailed documentation of the encounters, the survivors' testimony, and the photographic evidence provided researchers with unprecedented insight into aggressive bear behavior. The Cole brothers' deaths contributed significantly to our understanding of human-bear conflict, noted Dr. Robert Peterson of the University of Alaska. And their sacrifice advanced bear safety knowledge that will protect future hunters and wilderness users. 5 years after the attack, the Cole family established a scholarship fund for wildlife management students studying predator behavior. The Mark and Ryan Cole Memorial Scholarship has funded research projects across Alaska and Canada. "We wanted their deaths to mean something," explained their mother, Patricia Cole. "If this scholarship helps train the next generation of wildlife biologists to better understand these magnificent and dangerous animals, then we've honored our son's memory." The legal settlement from the wrongful death lawsuit was used to fund bear safety education programs for hunters and outdoor recreationists. The Cole family insisted that the money be used to prevent similar tragedies rather than simply compensating their loss. "No amount of money brings back our boys," said William Cole. "But if we can save other families from going through this nightmare, then something positive comes from our pain." The attack site on Afognak Island remains unchanged, gradually returning to its natural state. The only evidence of the tragedy is the small memorial cross and the occasional visitor who knows the story. "Nature heals quickly," observed Sarah Morrison during a flight over the island. "You'd never know that such violence occurred there unless you knew where to look." Alaska Fish and Wildlife continues to monitor bear populations on Afognak Island, but has found no evidence of increased aggression or unusual behavior. The attack appears to have been an isolated incident involving one particularly territorial individual. "Brown bear attacks on humans are statistically rare," notes current fish and wildlife biologist Dr. Amanda Foster. "But when they occur, they're often fatal. The Cole brothers' case reminds us that we're visitors in these animals' homes, and sometimes we're not welcome." 9. The massive grizzly that killed Mark and Ryan Cole entered Alaska hunting folklore as one of the largest and most aggressive bears ever encountered. His story is told around campfires and in hunting lodges across the state, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in Alaska's wilderness. "That bear on Afognak Island," hunters will say, shaking their heads. 900 pounds of pure meanness. Took everything 6 experienced hunters could throw at him and still killed 2 men before going down. The Cole brothers' hunting rifles recovered from the attack site were returned to their families as keepsakes. Mark's .300 Winchester Magnum and Ryan's .30-06 now hang in their parents' home, silent reminders of their son's final adventure. "These rifles represent our boys' love of hunting and the outdoors," said Patricia Cole. "They're painful to look at, but they're also precious memories of who our sons were." The story of the Cole brothers and the massive Afognak Island grizzly became the subject of a documentary film that aired on the Outdoor Channel. Death in the Wilderness, the Afognak Island bear attack, featured interviews with survivors, family members, and wildlife experts. This tragedy illustrates the raw power and unpredictability of Alaska's wilderness, the documentary narrator explained. Two experienced hunters with proper equipment and training were no match for 900 pounds of territorial grizzly bear. 10 years after the attack, Bear Harrison finally returned to Alaska for a hunting trip. The experience was therapeutic, helping him overcome the post-traumatic stress that had plagued him since watching his friends die. "I needed to face my demons," Harrison explained. "That bear took away my confidence and my peace of mind. Coming back to Alaska was my way of reclaiming both." Alex Chen became a successful wildlife photographer, but never forgot the images that launched his career. His photographs of the aggressive Afognak Island grizzly remain his most powerful and disturbing work. "Those images capture the exact moment when we realized we were no longer the apex predators," Chen reflected. "In that instant, we became prey." Dr. Jennifer Walsh continued her emergency medicine practice, but also became an expert in wilderness trauma care. She authored several papers on treating bear attack victims and developed training protocols still used by wilderness medical professionals. "The Cole brothers' deaths taught me that even with all our medical knowledge, nature can present challenges we're simply not equipped to handle," Walsh wrote. "Their case changed how I practice wilderness medicine." The hunting industry in Alaska was impacted by the attack, with insurance companies raising premiums for guides and outfitters. Some smaller operations were forced out of business by the increased costs and liability concerns. The Cole brothers' deaths reminded everyone in the industry that we're dealing with life and death situations every day, said Alaska Professional Hunters Association President Mike Thompson. "The financial and legal risks are enormous." Sarah Morrison continued flying hunters and fishermen to remote locations across Alaska, but the memory of evacuating the Cole brothers' bodies never left her. She became an advocate for improved emergency communications in remote hunting camps. "If we'd had better communication equipment, maybe the rescue helicopter could have reached them sooner," Morrison argued. "Those extra hours might have made the difference between life and death for Mark Cole." The massive grizzly's skull was eventually scored by Boone and Crockett measurers, earning a place in the record books as one of the largest brown bears ever documented. The 28-inch skull represented the peak of the species' evolutionary development. "This bear was a genetic masterpiece," noted Dr. Martinez. "Everything about him was perfectly designed for survival and dominance in his environment. Unfortunately, that included the ability to kill humans." The attack changed Alaska's hunting regulations, with new requirements for bear safety equipment and training for guides operating in brown bear habitat. The Cole Amendment mandated specific safety protocols and emergency communication equipment. "We can't prevent all bear attacks," said Alaska Department of Fish and Game Commissioner Bruce Walker, "but we can ensure that hunters and guides are better prepared to handle these encounters." 15 years after the attack, the Cole family still receives letters from hunters and outdoor enthusiasts who were inspired by Mark and Ryan's story. Many credit the brothers' deaths with motivating them to take bear safety more seriously. "Your son's story saved my life," wrote one hunter from Montana. "I was planning a DIY bear hunt in Alaska without proper safety equipment. After reading about what happened to Mark and Ryan, I hired a professional guide and invested in the best safety gear I could find." The memorial scholarship established in the Cole brothers' name has funded dozens of wildlife research projects, contributing to better understanding of human-wildlife conflict across North America. The research has helped prevent numerous potential tragedies. Mark and Ryan's legacy lives on in every bear safety protocol we implement, said scholarship recipient Dr. Lisa Johnson. Their deaths continue to protect other hunters and wilderness users decades later. Tom Beaumont passed away in 2019, 5 years after the attack that ended his guiding career. Friends said he never fully recovered from the trauma of losing 2 clients to the massive Afognak Island grizzly. Tom died with a broken heart, said his longtime friend Dave Miller. He blamed himself for those boys' deaths, even though everyone knew he'd done everything humanly possible to protect them. The attack site on Afognak Island has become a pilgrimage destination for some hunters, who visit to pay their respects to the Cole brothers and to understand the dangers they might face in Alaska's wilderness. Standing where it happened gives you a different perspective, said visitor Jack Morrison. You realize how quickly things can go wrong, how fast a hunting trip can turn into a life-or-death struggle. The massive grizzly's hide was eventually donated to the University of Alaska for educational purposes. The 9-foot pelt helps students understand the true size and power of Alaska's apex predators. When students see this bear hide, explained Professor Dr. Michael Chen, they gain immediate respect for the animals they might encounter in the field. It's a visceral lesson in wildlife danger that no textbook can provide. Alaska continues to experience bear attacks every year, but the protocols developed following the Cole brothers' deaths have reduced the fatality rate. Better equipment, training, and communication have saved countless lives. The Cole Amendment has been incredibly effective, noted current Fish and Wildlife Commissioner Sarah Peterson. We still have bear encounters, but we're much better prepared to handle them safely. The story of Mark and Ryan Cole and their encounter with the massive Afognak Island grizzly remains one of Alaska's most documented and studied bear attacks. Their deaths contributed to significant improvements in hunter safety and wildlife management practices. Those 2 young men from Denver will never be forgotten, said Alaska hunting guide Jim Thompson. Every time a hunter survives a bear encounter because of better equipment or training, that's Mark and Ryan's legacy living on. The hunting industry across North America was changed by the Cole brothers' deaths, with improved safety standards, better equipment requirements, and enhanced guide training becoming standard practice. The Afognak Island attack was a watershed moment for hunting safety, noted Outdoor Industry Association spokesman Robert Davis. It forced everyone to take bear encounters more seriously and invest in better protection. 20 years after the attack, Alex Chen returned to Afognak Island to photograph the site where his friends died. The forest had completely reclaimed the area, with no visible evidence remaining of the violence that occurred there. Nature has erased all traces of that night, Chen observed, but the memory lives on in everyone who was there. That bear changed all our lives forever. The Cole family continues to honor their son's memory through the Scholarship Fund and their advocacy for hunter safety. They've turned their tragedy into a force for positive change in the outdoor recreation community. Mark and Ryan loved hunting and the outdoors, said their father William Cole, now in his 80s. If their deaths help other hunters stay safe and enjoy the wilderness they love so much, then we've given their loss meaning. The massive Afognak Island grizzly that killed the Cole brothers remains a legend in Alaska hunting circles, representing both the magnificent danger and unpredictable nature of the state's wilderness. His story serves as a permanent reminder that in Alaska, humans are not always at the top of the food chain. That bear taught us humility, reflected Bear Harrison, now retired from hunting. No matter how prepared you think you are, no matter how much firepower you carry, nature can still humble you in an instant. Mark and Ryan learned that lesson with their lives. The legacy of September 28, 2024 lives on in every bear safety protocol, every piece of protective equipment, and every hunter who takes Alaska's wilderness seriously. The Cole brothers' deaths were not in vain if they continue to save lives decades into the future. Their story will be told as long as people hunt Alaska, said hunting writer Jim Peterson. Mark and Ryan Cole paid the ultimate price to teach us all about respecting the wilderness and the magnificent, dangerous animals that call it home.